and gentlemen, it is time for prize fighters, circus freaks, and gangsters. I'm Jamie.
And I'm Greta.
And today we are discussing, as always, the 19th century. The ugliest, dirtiest, most beautiful, and most inventive century I can think of that isn't probably the 20th.
Full of discoveries that were used for great things and for, oh my god, what were you thinking?
Yeah. Well, it's lucky we didn't end up with, monkey cyborgs or anything, but on that note, we have before us today The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which was something. It was quite something. What? Do you remember seeing this film originally? It's a 2003 film that was directed by the guy who did the first Blade movie. So I expected greatness out of this, and it was not quite what I expected.
I 100% went and saw this movie and promptly forgot every goddamn thing about it except that Sean Connery was in it. And I didn't know why until I sat down and watched it again. And, well, we're going to hear why.
Yeah, well, let me preface this by saying that this film, by everyone's account, was ruined by Sean Connery. And Sean Connery took this role in the place of the architect in The Matrix and Gandalf in the Hobbit films. So let us thank Sir Sean Connery for passing on those two film series.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, that, all in all, sacrificing this movie to make those two films better.
Yeah.
It was okay.
Yeah, I suppose it is. And this was a great graphic novel by Alan Moore, who also wrote The Watchmen. I'm sure you saw that film as well, right?
I did, and I've read The Watchmen, and I think, I enjoyed a lot of what The Watchmen was about. And so now knowing that and having done, a little research too, I am going to go back and look at the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen graphic novel, because that's a book that's going to get banned in Florida.
Yeah, it probably is. I guess happily for Alan Moore, the film bears absolutely no resemblance to the comic book, with the exception of the fact that the cast of characters is roughly the same. They took fictional characters that were really popular in the 19th century and turned them into basically the Victorian Avengers. Yeah.
There's a scene where you're in kind of a secret room, and then there's two paintings that kind of have sort of like other sort of Avengers of their time, of sort of medieval times, early modern times.
Oh yeah, and I will get into those teams because they are also very, very fun. But this one consists of, and the movie team, I will stress again, is led by Alan Quartermain, aka Sean Connery. And for that reason, Sean Connery was the one who said that Quartermain needs to lead this team. He's
an EP on the movie, so I'm sure he had some financial power here.
There is that. And I'm sure he was probably a fan of Alan Quartermain, the Alan Quartermain books growing up, because H. Rider Haggard was a really, really popular author, and that character, Quartermain, gave rise to Indiana Jones and Doc Savage, who influenced both Superman and Batman. So, I mean, this is a really important character, although I personally have never given a shit about these, Teddy Roosevelt-style literary characters.
Yeah, and I think as we go through the storyline and run across each of these characters, I think it'd be worthwhile just to give a little synopsis of who these people are, because they have all but disappeared from sort of the popular character canon, where they lived for 100 years. I mean, they all had the staying power of, say, James Bond at that point.
Yeah. Former Mr. Universe competitor Sean Connery was James Bond, and then kind of the original Indiana Jones. To him, it probably seemed like he had completed some kind of perfect, I don't know, that award ceremony where you get the 3 awards, the 3 SAG awards?
Oh, the whole EGOT thing. Yeah, he gets the whole thing. All right, so the premise of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is kind of the world up until now has been a very, direct human and animal labor existence. Guns are only a single shot. If you want to get anywhere, you need to walk on your own 2 feet, or you go at the speed of horses or wind power. And now that we're in the Victorian age, we're starting to get sort of machine power. And the world's about to flip over, which I think, for where we were in 2000 was this great message to revisit. Like, we were on the verge of all of this computing power exploding and absolutely changing all of our lives. So a great premise.
That is a really good point. And so in 1899, we claimed and invaded the Philippines. And for some reason, we changed the name of Puerto Rico to Porto Rico, as in Porto Rico. I was trying to find interesting things that happened in 1899. And I mean, here we are 100 years later, and we have invaded most of the Middle East. And we didn't quite claim it, but we owned it for a while.
Yeah. I mean, it's, as much as we're talking about the 19th century, I think, extending the 19th century up until World War I is definitely worthwhile, because in a lot of ways, that was this big changing point, much more than the death of Queen Victoria, which happened right at the end of the 19th century.
I would definitely agree with that. When would you start the 19th century, I feel like, doesn't really get going until about the 1840s, because it's previously just kind of the late Renaissance. Do you have that same take?
I would say the heart of the 19th century lies in the railroad.
Okay.
And sort of the big dreams. And again, it's sort of round one of, you can get somewhere at a speed faster than your own 2 feet or a horse.
And the telegraph was laid basically at the exact same time as the railroad, correct?
Yeah, they were one and the same.
So that was the first, that was a V1 of the internet.
Right. So to make the point that we're going from this sort of human-powered age to the machine age, you have this like creepy-looking tank thingy just messing up all the buildings in downtown Imperial London. I mean, it's just crashing through shit, squishing bobbies. I mean, this is an unstoppable, terrible machine of death and destruction.
Yeah, it was. I believe it was reminiscent, or it immediately made me think of Master of the World by Jules Verne. And they drew really heavily on Jules Verne for this. Do you remember that book?
I did not read that one, but it is, that whole Jules Vernean, a lot of the base layers of steampunk, and just these enclosed iron tanks that people are inside and can it's mysterious and dangerous, and it feels unstoppable.
It was a Jules Verne imagination of what was coming in warfare and things like that. And in the movie, we actually saw the tank there. That's a British Mark I tank. So they kind of drew from history.
Oh, okay.
It came 20 years later. But that was the first British tank. And even, you saw that guy with, that crazy chainmail face mask where he looked like he was straight out of G.I. Joe. Mm-hmm, that's a real tanker's face mask. So the steel for the tanks was so shitty that any bullet coming through it would create tons of spalling, which is where the metal fractures into tons of little pieces and then ricochets around the inside of the tank. And so to prevent the metal flakes from getting in their eyes, because they could barely see anyway, the inside of these tanks was horrific.
Right. Yeah, they were looking through a mail slot, basically.
Yeah, while you're literally choking to death on carbon monoxide fumes. And it was 122 degrees in those tanks. So they have heat exhaustion. They can't see. They can't hear anything. In order to make changes to direction, and they only went 3 miles an hour. But the one of the spotter would have to bang on the engine with this huge spanner wrench to get his attention, and then would hand signal for them to turn.
It was so loud in there.
So it was literal hell on earth to be in a tank. But it was hell for people on the outside, too.
And they were in there for hours and hours, and of course there's no bathrooms in tanks, and so they were using the ammo can. So it's 122 degrees, and you've got these metal cans full of human waste in there. So, just
and
one
it's
more
so
extra.
humid in there, so that stink is just boiled into their skin. Ooh, that's nice.
Anyway, These guys, as sort of much more organized bad guys, were only in there for a little while. They bash into a bank. They go to this vault. They kaboom it open, and the bad guy with the tank driver's face mask gets off, and they sort of go past his cane, which is a skull, but it also has a Mason's mark on it, like the Freemasons.
Yep, yeah, they put Mason's marks all over this thing.
Yeah.
That was the time of the Da Vinci Code, so everybody wanted to see that dumb shit.
Right. And they go in and they take some stuff, including some drawings, and you're like, what's this? And then they move on and they do
those were some really cool, like, watercolor, water-stained architectural drawings. I mean, those would be beautiful to put in a frame and hang on your wall. They were gorgeous.
Right. But they sort of say, hey, these are really what we're coming for, or whatever. And so, like, your first clue. And then they crash into a scientist lab. You know they're scientists because they're wearing white coats and they're talking in German. Because the whole shtick is, oh, the Germans are invading the British. No, the British are invading the Germans. And it's very much giving the secret societies are disrupting the world to try to cause these wars to something. The whole, like, underground Masons or everything, like, this is the flavor they're giving this.
Yeah, and they kind of have, I mean, the German bad guys are Nazis, and they're wearing, like, Nazi helmet. Well, at one point they're wearing World War I British helmets, which I found fascinating because their helmet shape never changed. They just changed the way they made it. So it started out as boiled leather with that pickle halba, with the big spike on the top. Those are cool looking helmets, but they're made out of boiled leather, and they're a really good target for snipers. So they don't protect your head at all, and they put a big beam on your head. So they just changed that to metal.
Yeah, so it is just a very sort of mishmash of, like, all of this symbology that sort of evokes the feelings.
I believe the word you're looking for is symbolism. Symbolism.
Anyway, they want you to think some stuff, so they put some pictures out there to activate
That
your
was
brain.
a movie reference that was actually older than the movie we're reviewing right now.
So after sort of like troubles happening in Europe, and then we get the beautiful shot of Mount Kilimanjaro, and it's just like Africa.
Oh, yes, British Africa. Colonial British Africa. What a lovely place that was.
And, you know, you have the guy in his uptight British suit with the bowler hat and the umbrella.
Oh, wait. You skipped right past the fact that the bad guy in this movie, who is Dr. Moriarty from the Sherlock Holmes films, he's M from James Bond, Moriarty from the Sherlock Holmes films, and basically Dr. Doom, all mashed up into one with a big silver mask on. And he blows up a bunch of Zeppelins with a bazooka, which I found, again, just to be one of those horrible ooparts things. And then I had to go run down when bazookas came out. And
see, I thought it was just a rocket launcher because it had the wire on it.
Yeah, and wire-guided rockets didn't exist until, like, the 50s.
Yes and...
Or at least wire-guided, like, handheld wire-guided rockets. That was a bazooka. And at that time they were using, like, humongous guns, like elephant guns, to kill tanks because they didn't even have rocket launchers. Although Robert Goddard did make a prototype for a rocket launcher in 1918, but they didn't do anything with it. So I think they kind of were like, there was a prototype, we might as well do it, because they did that with submarines later on.
I mean, because the British were using rockets in the Napoleonic War because they'd sort of figured out gunpowder and, you know, fireworks and everything, and so they just, like, made rockets out of, like, big fireworks. But okay, wire guided, yeah.
I think the problem with rockets up to that point was there was no way to control them. Like the Chinese even had rockets way back, but they fired all over the place as a general rule.
They were a mess. Yeah, you could really make a mess with this. But yeah, so
it's crazy what a mess gunpowder can make sometimes.
But yes, the bazooka, wire-guided rocket, whatever the hell that was, yes, they do the explodey, the German Zeppelins filled with hydrogen. And that was another one of those things where you're evoking like these technological marvels, these huge industrial wrought iron spaces are a new thing at this period too.
That's a great point. Big indoor spaces did not really exist. I mean, aside from like places like the Taj Mahal and things like that. I mean, they had to be specially constructed.
Cathedrals were it before this, yeah.
Yeah, and so it was in Britain that we really had the first big Piccadilly Circus and stuff like that. They had that grand exhibition hall and things like that. The Glass Palace thing.
Oh, you're thinking, of the World Exposition. Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband, created the Crystal Palace, and so it was the iron. It was the iron frame with all of the glass in it, and now it's actually you can go see it still. It's part of Kew Gardens, part of one of their conservatories, one of their greenhouses, and I mean even now you're like, wow, that is a fantastical, crazy thing.
Oh, cool! I'm definitely gonna have to check that out when I get to the UK. And the set design in this film was amazing. While they might have gotten very, very loose with the technology, did you love the set design as much as I did? I mean, they really went in.
The set design was fun. I really felt like sort of the shape of the interior spaces, like the carpenters who are like, this is the shape that we're going to make the rooms. I was like, wow, they made some really great decisions.
And I mean, although I don't think that I would enjoy the conversation that would go on in those old school men's clubs, the decor in those old school men's clubs is gorgeous. So when we go in to see in Africa, when this man is going to go find Sean Connery's character and
Alan Quatermain.
Yes, Quatermain. I keep thinking Indiana Jones.
He's dressed like him.
But it's, there's all the animal heads on the walls and things, and just, that it smells like rich mahogany and leather-bound books. Like, it's amazing.
There is something very particular about that stage of British decor. Like, it's precise, and it's a little, not exactly rough around the edges, because it is very polished, but you can see its handmadeness. Like, the fact that you have really skilled people making this stuff by hand is kind of its mark. And we're just on the edge when, like, machine-made stuff, that's what you want.
And you make a very, very great point there, because so much effort went into an upcoming character, Nemo's character, with the design of his technology. All of the ridiculous filigree and all that really speaks to your point about how everything was still being handmade at this time.
Right. And I have thoughts about how they decored his submarine. Oh God.
Before we get to that, we get a team of Ned Kelly style bandits in Africa.
Yeah. I mean, they've got the hats, the long leather coats, the sidearms.
And the body armor.
Yeah.
They have boilerplate body armor, just like Ned Kelly had. For anybody who doesn't know, Ned Kelly is a classic villain from Australia who's kind of like the cowboy outlaw that you have with Billy the Kid, except that when he knew he was going to have a showdown with the cops, he commissioned a boilermaker to build like plate armor for him and his crew, and they had this huge shootout with the cops, and they ended up getting taken out because the cops shot him in the legs, which weren't armored. But same with these guys.
And so for people who like don't understand boilerplate, boilermaker, like before we had diesel engines, what you would have is you would have something called a boiler, and you would heat it up with coal power, and it would produce steam to run things like turbines or put steam in your steam radiators, or it was sort of this first source of power before you had, say, diesel engines directly turning mechanical things.
Thank you for mentioning that. I had not even... But so the steel would have been at a much higher tolerance because it had to withstand a great deal of pressure. And it was...
And a lot of temperature changes because your boiler is going to heat up, cool down, heat up, cool down, heat up, cool down. So, yeah, there were a bunch of things that they had to work into the metal that made it, much tougher.
Yeah, and much more heavy. Those suits were apparently really heavy. But the guys in this film are firing automatic weapons, which there's a hilariously British aphorism there where they're like, that's just simply unsporting.
Yeah, and sort of like we talk about in Warrior, how it's always like the guys with the hatchets or the guys with just their hands are always taking out the guys with the guns. Here, the automatic weapons jam, and so the guys with the single-shot rifles and their fists are taking out these, yo-yos with they're always breaking down automatic weapons. So there is sort of that like pushback against this newfangled but not dependable modern weaponry.
And it's fun that you say that because, again, it goes back to the handmade versus the machine-made, and where the handmade stuff looks beautiful, and it will later on in this film, the handmade machine guns, as the Germans found when they tried them in World War II, did not. Because the parts were handmade, they could not replace parts from one gun to another if a firing pin went out or something like that. It had to be specifically machined for that gun, which made them basically impossible to use.
Right. Yeah, so this is where we meet Alan Quartermain, and
and we did, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we did also have a suitcase bomb in this.
Yeah.
And that was also, it was brand new in the 19th century, having timed bombs. And
right, because the clockwork aspect of it, and then having an electrical trigger to explosives.
There you go. And the clockwork was really important because, as we've mentioned many times, clocks were still not hyper common at this time.
Right, they were still more or less handmade, more like you didn't have mass produced timepieces for the most part, and just the whole thing of having an electrical spark as something that could start something, because until now, like, a spark was fire.
Well, at the beginning of the 19th century, I believe that they used a timer that would twist something that would, like one of those twisting lighters, like a friction lighter.
Right, but that's still heat rather than stored electricity.
Good point.
Yeah. But a little bit on Alan Quartermain. I mean, you talked about him a little bit, how he's this character invented, by H. Rider Haggard. And so he comes from the same time period as Tarzan and just all of these very much, a man alone in the world. I don't need anyone. Women are just a distraction. This is very much this mold of these ultra macho male characters.
Yeah, who I would like to reiterate for anybody who is unaware, I mentioned that this man was similar to Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt was a self-aggrandizing blowhard who used to constantly whine about how there weren't enough buffalo left to murder. And then he would go out and hunt down, pay somebody an exorbitant amount of money so they could find a buffalo, and then he'd just walk up to it and shoot it. Because he was a piece of shit. But he liked to talk about how cool he was.
Well, and that bringing that up is kind of interesting because Quartermain's big thing was that he was like this super duper great shot. He was a professional big game hunter, but at the same time, he's like, oh, I've helped ruin the African savannas, but the only way I can make money is to continue to lead hunts to further ruin the African savannas. It's like this loop of very trapped conservative thinking. There's like, what could I do instead? And they never consider that.
They never think of stepping very slightly outside of their comfort zone and saying, sir, do you have any opportunities for me in the great wide world of tourism?
And another thing to know about his character is that he's one of these guys who gets married. He actually gets married twice, but his wife dies by the end of the book twice as a story plot point. So
yeah, they keep bringing it up in this film, but there's never really any resolution to it. It's just kind of
right. But I'm just saying that the idea of using the death of women as a story device, you're like, it's been going on for a long time.
But so when he gets to this hall of the league or whatever, and we see the previous leagues. So the medieval league that's on the, so it's got Ivanhoe in a painting with Robin Hood and the Black Arrow. Yeah. I'm not familiar with Black Arrow, and I've heard of Ivanhoe, but I don't really know anything about him. Do you?
I don't know anything about the Black Arrow, but these are just sort of like well-known literary characters that sort of in the same mold that they're taking well-known literary characters of the 19th century and sort of making them into sort of heroes as they need them. That's what they would have done with these guys as well. Yeah,
they're being called up like the Avengers. Like there's M is the medieval Captain or Nick Fury, and so. Like 17th century, they had the Three Musketeers with D'Artagnan, Seahawk from Seahawk, and Captain Blood from Captain Blood. And then the Gulliver's League was the Reverend Dr. Sin. I've never heard of that one. Have you?
I have no idea who that is.
Sir Percy from your Scarlet Pimpernel book.
See?
And Hawkeye from The Last of the Mohicans, which we'll have to review at some point.
Yeah.
And Lemuel Gulliver from Gulliver's Travels.
Right. And that's very much the 18th century kind of literary things. It was a little bit fun when Quatermain is coming into London. They make things happen. People get blown up, blah, blah, blah. He's like, yeah, fine, I'll go back to London. And so he's like, haha, dress for summer in London. And of course, it's pissing down rain and everything. They keep making references to Jules Verne. Because when he arrives at the building, he's like, around the world in 80 days, my God, which is a Jules Verne book. And then when they're like walking down the stairs into the cellar to this secret room, he's like, man, where are we going, Australia? Which is kind of an oblique reference to Jules Verne's journey to the center of the earth and the whole idea of like digging a hole through the center of the earth.
That one I did not catch.
And then, let's see, is that the last one?
I got the Around the World in 80 Days. I didn't hear the second one. So, but I wouldn't have gotten that reference anyway.
Because where we end up is we meet Captain Nemo, who of course is the Jules Verne character from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Yes, and Nemo is a pirate. He's an Indian pirate. And he pilots a submarine called the Nautilus, which is so named after the first French submarine.
Ah, okay.
So an interesting thing about submarine building that I didn't realize, and it was one of the main problems with 19th century submarines, is that one, like in the Civil War submarines, they had problems with lighting. So the candles that they used consumed the available oxygen, and then they all died. It's assumed they all suffocated and then drowned.
Yeah.
But they had problems with navigation because compasses don't work inside of iron-hulled ships. So,
God damn it.
So the first French one was wood, and then the second French one was actually copper. And a bunch of these French designs were actually mixed into other subs, but there were tons of countries making subs at the time. So later on, we'll see a missile fired out of one sub, and that actually was an idea that the Russians made. They couldn't make a submarine do anything. It went 0.3 miles an hour, and it couldn't turn, it couldn't do anything, but it could fire a rocket into the air and not accomplish anything else.
That's all we care about, man. Okay, science. Part of, like, the whole problem with these submarines, or part of the problems, is that at this point, people didn't understand the problems with pressurized air. Because up to this point, the most exciting and sort of air-challenging thing humans had done is, like, go up in a balloon or climb a really tall mountain. And while you do have air pressure changes between like 0 feet at sea level and 1,000 feet and even say 30,000 feet, like you can still breathe. And again, because you're sort of working at human speed, you're adjusting to those air pressure changes pretty well. However, when you go 10 feet underwater, so a little over 3 meters.
Which is the depth to which the submarines at this time were going, by the way. The Holland, which was the only working military submarine at the time, 10 feet. That was as deep as it went.
The air pressure doubles.
No shit.
Yeah. You go from 1 atmosphere to 2 atmospheres.
That's wild.
And so these guys were going down in these diving bells, which is just like if you ever take a cup and like pull it down underwater, the air stays in there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's all a diving bell is. So they're going down in like these diving bells and these submarines and all these different things. And they don't realize they're exposing their bodies to these huge, rapid changes in pressure. And so, yeah, they don't understand, like, the idea that oxygen is air and there's like this thing in the air that we need to breathe, that's like news to people. This is brand new.
Yeah, they were still calling it phlogiston or something like that. And phlogiston.
Yeah, phlogiston. But that was...
And the ether, or the ether?
The ether.
How do you say that word? A-E-T-H-E-R?
It's just ether.
It's not,
the ether.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because, so ether had to do, like, they were understanding that light was waves, but it's like, well, if you have a wave, you must have a medium that it's...
Well, it's a wave and a particle, right?
Right, but at that point, they hadn't figured out that that light was a particle, but they could tell it was
okay.
a wave. They were getting sophisticated enough that they could figure out that light worked in waves. But if you have a wave, you have to have something that's waving. Like water is the medium that water waves wave.
Okay.
And so in order for light to be a wave, there needs to be something out there in space for the light to be waving. And so that's what the ether was.
Ah. What is it? Gravity that makes light wave?
It's energy. Like
Oh.
light is on the same continuum of energy from sound up through X-rays and gamma rays and all of that. It's all a continuum.
Oh, no shit. So light and sound are the same thing. They're just on a different continuum of the spectrum.
Right. And sort of the same, like, yes, there's no sound in space because there's nothing for it to like knock around and then get into our eardrums and do something. But that sort of energy, you sort of work up fast enough and you get to radio waves, and then, well, you go from sound to heat. I don't have the spectrum in front of me, but all of this energy is one incredibly long spectrum. And again, the 19th century is when people were understanding that there were sounds we could not hear. There was light we could not see. And so the fact that people were investigating stuff like psychic powers, they're like, why not? We just found out about ultraviolet light and radio waves. So maybe there's brain waves. Why not?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so there must be ghosts. I mean, that logic does kind of hold. I mean, it makes sense.
At
it makes
least
sense.
for asking questions and people going out and like poking at it. Like, it totally makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And this was also the era in which pop science became a thing. Popular science wasn't a thing before this. And so people are discussing all these different discoveries as they're coming out. And they might not be entirely caught up because they could be in a place that doesn't get all the brand new news. And so they might be discussing stuff that's 5 years old and nonsense, but they still have it in their head. This is the science of the time. This is it. This is the work.
Absolutely. So yeah, Quartermain comes down to this really cool looking room that has the paintings that you said. And this was one of those room designs where you're just like, okay, that's cool. Because this room is supposed to be underground, like way underground. And they give it a domed ceiling, like the inside of a tunnel, which, thank God, like that's what you would have to do. You've got like these tons of earth pressing down on this secret underground chamber. And so you give it a shape that makes sense to do that.
There you go. I mean, I would assume that the like the bomb shelters we have under, Cheyenne Mountain and things like that are they're spherical, and then they built a box inside of it. One would assume, but
right. So this sort of looks like probably it was, say, like an abandoned London Underground tunnel that they've now put these massive bookcases and ceiling moldings and gas lighting. They've put in the gas lights because the character M is going through and he's turning up the gas lights, and I was just like, that's so cool. Because they had figured out that you can extract gas from the same place that you're getting coal mining, and they were piping this into London so people could have gas lighting.
Yeah, which I would imagine was quite a fire hazard, especially given the basic lack of any fire services.
Yeah, it was a fire hazard, but considering what people had to do to light before, it was a goddamn miracle.
Yeah, that's true. And plus you get dimmers, which I guess they probably lost for a little while with electric arc lighting until they figured out how to work that.
Quartermain shows up, and then Captain Nemo shows up, and he is this sort of fantastical, he's Indian in the movie, but they sort of, once again, just evil German symbolism. Here we've got sort of vaguely kind of Persian, Indian, Eastern warrior symbolism just kind of thrown at him willy-nilly and see what sticks.
Yeah, pretty much. He's a mix of all kinds of things.
Yes, he is. But as far as like the Captain Nemo, that to hell with the above the surface world, I just want to run around and do my science underwater. That's Captain Nemo from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I mean, yeah, that works. I'm for it. Yeah,
I mean, provided that there was any way whatsoever for a human being to survive in a submarine, which there wasn't.
Look, he was a scientific genius, not ready to share his discoveries with the world. He figured out oxygen generation under water. Definitely. Totally. Sure.
Even past that, if you read about like German U-boat crews in World War II, their lives were unmitigated horror. Oh,
yes.
My God, from start to end. I mean, beginning with the fact that there was one toilet for 50 men, and those men hot bunked all the time and couldn't shower for 6 months. And you got all that on top of the fact that their food tasted like diesel. They're covered in diesel all the time. They're smoking all the time. And, like, they have the hatch shut because it would flood the ship if they left it open in a big wave. Like, if they left it, the conning hatch
they had
open.
a snorkel. They did have a snorkel, though.
Oh, yeah. But, that's like trying to breathe through a straw.
Anyway, so we meet shiny blue Captain Nemo, and then we kind of meet the extremely annoying Invisible Man.
Yes. Rodney Skinner, who is not the Invisible Man from the H.G. Wells story. This is just some British thief. I don't recall the Invisible Man all that well, although I was a huge H.G. Wells guy for a long time.
I mean, I definitely remember the scientist who, like, figured out how to make himself invisible was a horrible, terrible, awful, bitter person who then proceeded to do horrible, terrible, awful things while he was invisible. Like, he made himself invisible, and then it turned out that was even worse than what his life was. And so then he did, like, lots of shitty things to make up for his life becoming worse because he made himself invisible.
Yeah, he was awful, and I think that was that came through when they made the Hollow Man remake with Kevin Bacon, and then they made the Dark Universe Invisible Man that was suitably terrifying.
Yeah, and so they're like, no, I'm not the original Invisible Man, I just stole the technology. But he does agree that being an invisible dude kind of sucks, and he's hoping the British government will come up with an antidote for him.
Yeah, I guess that's a fairly stupid premise for this thing, but I really hated this character, and I've never liked the Invisible Man as a character. The idea of a man just walking around naked except for an overcoat and a hat and sunglasses is irksome to me.
I mean, the Ralph Ellison Invisible Man, which is sort of talking about, non-white or specifically black and white society.
Being black in America. Yeah,
that is a fascinating study there. But the original premise, I mean, I think the one thing that H.G. Wells got is this Invisible Man shtick brings you nothing but misery.
Yeah, and also it's really something that's only coveted by psycho stalkers and people who are up to no good.
Yeah, so anyway, they make him a thief, and they're trying to do the, like, oh, but I'm like a gentleman thief. I'm just a charming rogue. Ha, ha, ha. And yeah, this character has no substance, which I suppose is fitting.
Well, there's plenty of British villains that they could have based this guy on. I mean, even the bad guy that Moriarty was based on in real life was like a British art thief, wasn't he? Mm-hmm. I mean, they could have used basically anybody else, but the choices they made in this film, as opposed to the comic, were not stellar.
Yeah, it was like they were kind of trying to make him comic relief, but yeah. Anyway, so finally, another interesting person shows up, and it's Mina Harker, who is Wilhelmina Harker, who is Dracula's second victim in the Bram Stoker book.
Yes, except they've turned her into a vampire in this. For reasons that I can't understand, and also in the comics she leads the team, and Quatermain is just kind of a pain in the ass. And in this, because Sean Connery wanted to run the show and fuck up the whole movie, he did so, and so Peter Wilson's Mina Harker has just been relegated to almost she's a non-essential character. She's an NPC, basically.
Right. They decide that she's a chemist, but they never really get into kind of what chemistry she's doing. I mean, the whole thing about the end of the Dracula book is that Mina Harker was bitten by Dracula, and if they hadn't killed him, then she would have become a vampire, but they do, so she doesn't, but she does have the bite marks.
All right. Well, I mean, that at least kind of makes sense, but there's no reason for her to be a vampire, and it doesn't help the plot along at all. I really was not a fan.
And this period of 2000s movie making, sort of the creation of the badass, butt kicking female character. Like, this is really playing into that kind of role making as well.
I guess. The sum total of her chemistry consisted of her opening and closing a very large leather-bound book.
Yeah, pretty much. Like, as you're saying, in the original book, and this is why it would get, or the original graphic novel, and this is why it would get banned in Florida, is that she is a bisexual divorced suffragist leader.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's fun.
And she has an affair with the fictional character Orlando, who, as a literary character, this is somebody who was a courtier of Queen Elizabeth I back in the 16th century and goes through on all these adventures and then decides he wants to experience more of life, and so he's transformed into a woman.
Ah, interesting. That's fun. I wonder if she's partially based on Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper was one of the first illustrated newspapers in the world, a newspaper with pictures. And the woman who married Frank Leslie, she eventually took his name, legally, to so that she could run his empire after he died. She was bisexual, and she left all of her estate to the main suffragette in the United States, who ended up getting the women the vote.
Oh, okay. The other fun thing about the character Orlando is that there was a 90s movie called Orlando, and that's the first time I ever saw Tilda Swinton in a role, and just was like, wow, she's amazing.
I don't know who Tilda Swinton is.
She's a British actress who... She definitely appears in kind of more arty films. I think the most popular role most people know her for is that she was the White Queen in the original Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe big theatrical movie.
I had to read all the C.S. Lewis books as a kid because my mom was being Christian at the time, but I don't remember the movie. And I didn't see the film.
Anyway, but yeah, no, she's one of these sort of phenomenal kind of iron hard actresses.
What did you think of Dorian Gray there? Did you like him?
Okay. He is... this movie, I realized part of the reason I forgot a lot of it, or must have forgotten about it, is I have a lot of very visceral, bad feelings about a lot of the characters in this movie and how they treat women.
Okay.
And Alan Quartermain's whole thing, he was like, oh, well, I hope, pretty lady, you're just showing up to tell us that your husband can't make it. And Dorian Gray, is like, I'm so beautiful. That's why people trust me. He had that sort of very particular smarmy, shiny 80s rich bro. I'm beautiful, so I'm going to run the world kind of. I can't even articulate how slimy he is to me.
He was, I couldn't stand the Anne Rice. I'm not an Anne Rice guy, but he was equally smarmy and obnoxious in Queen of the Damned, which came out the previous year. Yeah. It was Stuart Townsend played that role. And, boy, I wanted this man to die throughout the movie. So, it was just... but I have to say, not nearly as much as the character they introduced after him. Tom Sawyer, the most useless character to ever be introduced into any goddamn thing ever. First off, as a literary character, not terribly interesting. What is your take on Tom Sawyer?
Well,
as a literary character.
I think Tom Sawyer is a great device as somebody who can travel through a lot of situations that we can see. But Tom Sawyer himself doesn't have a lot there.
He was just a kid on a riverboat. I don't even understand. He made it into this movie because they were like, oh, we need an American so that Americans can relate to it.
Yeah.
And while I am first and always to say bullshit about that because I don't get affected by that somehow. But I was talking about it with one of my friends this morning, and he said that the only reason he liked that movie as a kid was because of Tom Sawyer.
Oh.
So
okay.
I guess the studios were right on this, but... I don't know who this actor is. He sucks. His look sucks. Everything. The character sucks. It just sucks. It's awful.
Before we sort of get past it, I do think it's worth explaining what the character of Dorian Gray is. He's a literary device
yes.
invented by Oscar Wilde. And the whole thing there is the character in the Oscar Wilde story is this beautiful young man, and he gets a picture painted of him, and then he goes through the, oh God, I'm getting old, and maybe I'm not as good a person as I should be. And so all of his aging and sins go onto the portrait, and then he stays sort of the young and beautiful on the outside. That's the whole thing about Alan Quatermain saying, no, when I was at Eton, he was still the grown young man, and I was a little kid, and so this guy's effectively an immortal. So they do get across that Dorian Gray is a complete, like, ooky slimeball, because that's who he is, but the sleaziness that is in there instead of a more interesting evil.
And his motivations when they're finally revealed are very shallow. Everything about this movie is shallow. It's not even skin deep, because they didn't get through 3 layers of skin. This is like a person with ashy skin getting lightly scratched with a fingernail and that line left in their skin. That's how deep this movie is.
Yeah. But when we're going to Dorian Gray's house to, like, go pick him up, because we've got Alan Quatermain, we've got Nemo, and we've got Mina Harker, and so now we've got to go pick up Dorian Gray, and so they're in, Captain Nemo has, like, this big-ass Cadillac-type car for some reason. Okay.
Do you want to talk about the car a little bit? Because this car was beautiful to look at. It actually took I think it was 2,500 hours. It might have been 3,500 hours for this man, for the guy who created that car. He made it out of 2 Cadillac limousines.
Oh, wow.
And every single thing in this car is handmade. It's hand detailed. Like, all of this is silver inlays and stuff. It is a beautiful, beautiful car. But the body style is from the 1930s or 40s. And, the cars in the 1899 looked like buggies that were drawn by horses, except they had an engine at the front.
Yeah, it definitely had, it was made out of a Cadillac, but I feel like it had more of, 1930s kind of Dodge styling, and it's like this very kind of wide and broad, ground hugging, and the way, what are they, the windows, it does sort of have like a submarine style to it. It's got a little bit of like that ship porthole thing going on, and the handmadeness of it very much comes through, and it's like, hey, even though this is this mechanical thing, you can still make it beautiful.
Yeah, and while I do appreciate that, what they were trying to go with for the handmade thing, everything back in these days looked way fucking jankier than anybody would ever, because when you're thinking of steampunk, you're thinking of, brass and inlaid wood and all this and that, but these are guys, filthy men who are in filthy workshops, who are creating things basically fever dreams of cocaine, and they're just staying up all night and building stuff. So, when you see the fastest car that existed in 1899, it looked like a big brown metal tube with 4 wheels stuck on it, and it kind of shaped like a cigar, and it went 65 miles an hour. So it was a little bit different than the 200 mile an hour 65-foot barge that Nemo was driving.
Yeah, but this scene as they're driving to Dorian Gray's house, this hit me very viscerally, and I almost quit watching the movie. Not because it was particularly worse than everything else. It just reminded me of my own life. And this is kind of why I am a little bit the way I am, where Sean Connery is looking at Mina Harker, is looking at Peter Wilson, and is basically, don't try to fuck me because I don't have time for that.
Yeah, it's bro, you're 75 years old. Nobody's trying to fuck you. And he just keeps going, well, I don't need a woman. And it's bro, nobody asked you. Nobody asked you once. Nobody's going to ask you in 10 minutes. Just shut the fuck up.
And so there was a whole bunch of time when I was in college working on my biology degree and sort of going through chemistry where I would get bullshit from guys who were basically like, I don't have time for somebody like you, or I would never date you. I'm like, who asked you? I'm just doing a titration here. The fuck?
They do the same shit with female athletes.
I'm in this chemistry lab doing chemistry to learn chemistry, and all of a sudden you're telling me how you would never date me in a million years. I'm like, well, A, ditto, but B, why are you using up air to say this to me? Like, so I feel like a certain amount of like my just prickly sarcasm to the world comes from guys just walking up to me and talking how much they do or don't want to sleep with me in places and times that, like, I'm not thinking about that, and neither should you. Or if you are, keep your goddamn mouth shut.
Did they start these conversations with, "You'd be a lot prettier if you smiled"?
No, they just skip right over that. Like, I would sort of like say, hand me this, or why did you do your calculation that way? Or, you know, this is turning purple faster than I thought it was. And they're like, well, when you talk to me that way, I'd never want to sleep with you. Like, the fuck? What? Like, and what?
Well, Sean Connery never met a woman he didn't want to slap, so let's just pin a gold medal on his chest for not slapping Peter Wilson.
But this whole thing of, and Mina Harker is going to go through the rest of this movie with every single other fucking white guy, I need to say, because Nemo never gets in on it because he's not white, spending time figuring out which of them's going to sleep with her. And they never ask her if she even has this on her mind. Like, nah! I just really, like, this brought me back to a place I thought I had left, and it just caught me so off guard.
Well, it is sadly true to both the 2000s and the 1900 and 2000 were both similar in that way, that people were still treating women as though they were, well, it all depends on where you are, I suppose. It's
right. The thing that was sort of bubbling up in my head, and we're going to have to go look at, is so much of the Gothic horror at its root, looking at the 19th century, is simply the horror that women experienced by being married. Like, that's 3/4 of what Gothic horror is.
Oh, I didn't realize that. But before I forget, and not to interrupt your point, but because I wanted to bring back, kind of derail the rage that's building here, and go back to.
Thank you. Sorry, I just, like I said, I didn't really want to go there, but
nope, it's totally fine. It's totally understandable. But going back to Oscar Wilde and Frank Leslie's wife. After Frank Leslie died, she married Oscar Wilde's older brother,
okay.
Yeah, and so he was basically gay, and she was basically a lesbian at the time. So they basically just cohabitated together and did their thing. But like they didn't really, I guess he was bisexual. They were both bisexual. But they really just partied together and kind of went their own ways. But I thought it was fun that, again, that she probably had to have influenced this story in some way, because the Oscar Wilde connection is there as well.
Oh, yeah. And as, we were talking about, again, outside this, the idea of these marriages of convenience, sometimes they were convenient for both halves of the marriage, that neither one of them wanted to marry anybody else. So hey, let's get married to each other so we can exist in society, and then just kind of go off and do our own things. There were worse marriages of convenience, but there are also these sort of happy cooperative marriages of convenience.
Yeah, I've been learning about a couple of those recently, and they're much more fun to learn about than the punches and bunches that you generally get.
But yeah, so they go and they pick up Dorian Gray, and the bad guys all show up, and there's sort of this gunfight, and Tom Sawyer shows up and saves everyone's butts, and he has nice guns, so that's why Alan Quartermain decides he can be in.
Yeah, although Alan Quartermain's dragging him the entire time, you're such an American using all those bullets. You only need one bullet. He's giving him that old man straight boomer energy.
Oh, very, very much so. I will say my first, oh, come on, of this movie, and there were a lot of them, but when Nemo's submarine, shows up at the London docks, I'm like, how big is this thing?
So in the movie, it's incalculably large. In the book, it was big as shit too. It was 230 feet long, which is 5 times as big as the submarines of the era.
Right.
So Yeah, it was
but
a big.
it sort of rises out of the water, like taller than all of the buildings around it. I'm like, do you know how deep it was around the London docks? Like, it wasn't that deep, but we got some Ant-Man like size shifting going on here.
Yeah, and I mean, they tried to show that like they were trying to raise out of the water to reduce their draft and all that, and they really drove home that it is the sword of the ocean because it's so
Yes.
slender. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful design on it with all the filigree and everything. Not that anybody would ever put filigree on a submarine because what the fuck is the point of that?
I was like, who's cleaning all of those nooks and crannies, Nemo?
Also, I mean, I'm not a person with 20 years of scientific teaching in my history, but I am familiar with the concept of drag, and I feel as though all those little points on the front of the ship would create a great deal of drag that would slow the ship down.
Or what about those 3 statues standing over the rudder?
It was not, it was designed for pleasure, not speed. And they talk about how fast it is. It makes it from Paris to Venice in 3 days, which was faster. So the Holland at the time that was built in 1897 had a surface speed of 7 miles an hour. So it would have taken 4.5 days, but not nearly in the the luxury that they did. It currently takes 17 hours, but
yeah, but before they get to Venice, they have to stop by Paris and pick up Dr. Jekyll / Mr. Hyde.
Ah, yes.
He's the muscle of the group, and I will say, I'm sorry, but his traps have your traps beat, Jamie.
Yeah, he does. He's a little deformed though, so I'll take mine.
Yeah, yeah. The way that
I'm attacked.
And again, here's another character from 19th century literature. And the shtick here is that Dr. Jekyll wanted to sort of extract all of his baser instincts. And so as Dr. Jekyll, he could be like this great man. And then the formula that he takes to make him to be Mr. Hyde is all of his animalistic self. And so he's sort of splitting himself in two. And once again, you have a character from literature who's a terrible person who does terrible things like rape, murder, theft, mayhem. I mean, these are not good people.
I've always assumed that his elixir was cocaine. Like, it was an allegory. It was an allegory for coke because he turns into a sex maniac. He's smashing stuff up. He's super strong. Like it. He thinks when he's not taking the elixir, like his brain's telling him like, oh, you need to take it. You're going to be super strong. Nobody likes you when you're not on it. Like it really has a lot of the hallmarks of cocaine in it.
Interesting. And yeah, when Tom Sawyer and Alan Quatermain are chasing him down in the streets of Paris, yes, somehow Tom Sawyer shoots 17 bullets from his 2 6-shooters. Like once it was like too many, I went back and I was like, how many shots was that? That's too many. But then Tom Sawyer busts out with, I can't smell anything. And I'm like, well, above the like nasal noise of the Paris slums? I bet not.
Yeah, and one fun thing I will mention is if you do rewatch any films made around this time, I think around 2003 is really when you saw the drastic shift. But the seriousness with which America started taking military things of that nature, happened right at this time because of 2000 in 2001 we had 9/11. And so you had this drastic shift in the way the military is shown in films and TV, and also like the number of shots and stuff like that. Like nobody was counting that shit back in the day. I mean, they had Shoot 'Em Up come out like I think in 2001, where he was shooting 1,000 bullets out of every gun and killing people with a carrot, and it was awesome. But and also the military's always bumbling assholes prior to 2001. After 2001, they are the heroes. They're super go hards. They have all the best tech, but they're total dickheads before 2001.
Yeah, before 2001, it's all a bunch of A-team stormtrooper stuff where everybody's just, shooting and nobody ever gets hit with nothing.
Yep. Yeah, the SWAT team shows up going, hut, 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 wearing their goofy blue uniforms.
Right. And then, so they managed to catch Dr. Jekyll in his Mr. Hyde incarnation. They take him into the submarine somehow, and then they have these stupidest people around him. Like, yes, they're trying to show that he's like going around bashing everyone, but it's like he's chained up. Just don't get close enough so he can touch you, but everybody keeps going in on him, and he's winging bodies.
They keep poking him with sharp sticks. Like, that's never calmed anyone down ever. That's like these dudes who are like, oh, when my wife gets mad, I just tell her to calm down. And it's like, you might as well blow your house up while you're at it. Holy shit. Might as well yell it at her while you're at it. Slap her. That's the Sean Connery way. Shake the shit out of her, like in the airplane movies.
Just walk up to me in a chemistry lab and tell me how much you do or don't want to sleep with me.
It'd be a lot sexier if you pronounced it titrate.
Okay. So,
if only they were that clever, right? To come up with at least like cute lines that like might actually elicit a laugh, but no.
And yeah, so we're here on the Nautilus, and Dr. Jekyll sort of reappears out of his Mr. Hyde incarnation, and we just sort of talk about it. And then, yeah, we get the scene on the submarine where, like, Tom Sawyer and Alan and Dorian, and even kind of in his own way, Dr. Jekyll are all like, wow, this Mina's so hot. I wonder which of us is going to get her.
We all know she's a vampire. I wonder what kind of vampire babies we could have.
Yeah, just that. And then we do find out the thing that was stolen in the first scene are the blueprints of Venice, that clearly Da Vinci made blueprints. Sure, fine, whatever. Because, like, there's the whole thing where, like, Dorian Gray is like, hey, how about I spend some time with you, Mina? And she's like, how about a drink? She's like, I don't like to drink. Her, like, I'm a vampire, can only eat blood thing. But he just, like, gets in her space. Like, just, like, if I just keep getting closer to you, then we can kiss. I was like, like, this is...
Yeah, and then he breaks a shot glass into between his fingers, and she cuts herself, and then gets horny off her own blood, which doesn't make any goddamn sense. None of it made any fucking sense. This entire interaction was terrible, and I'm sure Jason Fleming was probably why I didn't like him in this movie is because he hated the shit out of being in this film. The man is a literal socialist, so he must have been just stewing in his own juices the entire time making this dumbass movie.
All of a sudden, they discover that a vial of the Mr. Hyde solution is missing. So clearly, in like the dumbest version of storytelling, everybody's like, well, the thief took it, obviously.
It would seem like an obvious thing to suggest that the thief took it, but yeah, I mean, it is a little bit on the nose, isn't it?
Right, and so it's just like, I guess we're supposed to look at that and go, oh, well, obviously we're supposed to not believe that, or if you do, I don't know, it just sort of felt like one of those writing things that it was sloppily done.
I will say, though, by the same token, that it probably would be the first thing. It would be the first thing top of mind. If you have a thief in your crew, you're probably a little worried about your possessions anyway. And then something goes missing.
That's
you're
true.
like, well, it's the invisible guy. I mean, he's already been in Quartermain's. He's been in Quartermain's cabin. So there's kind of a little bit of precedent established here, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So
I don't want to give these writers too much credit, but I don't think they were being lazy in this particular instance.
And I will take that's the first thing that pops to mind. But as more and more stuff goes wrong, they still believe that it was thief guy Skinner who took it, and you're like, oh, okay. And I guess it's more as the rest of the movie starts to sort of crumble and fall apart as a going concern. That's what I'm like,
Yeah, well, it is a bit of a problem when you have this team on whom the fate of the world rests, and they are in no way, shape, or form a team. They are a very loose confederation of people who dislike and distrust each other.
And it doesn't even feel like they were given kind of the mission, really, sort of, at all.
No, they were kidnapped, stuck on a ship, and told that they had to save the world.
Right.
That's probably not going to be particularly motivating to anyone.
Team building exercises really do have a purpose, I guess.
I guess. They all need to go out in the woods and have a trust fall, is what they need to do. Trust falls.
Oh my God,
not enough trust falls.
Trust fall is what went through my mind, too. Oh, my God.
I don't know if they still have to do trust falls and things like community building exercises now, but that has to have been one of the more embarrassing and pointless exercises I have ever been involved in.
I mean, like, middle school wasn't awkward enough.
Yeah, and I mean, I wasn't one of the kids who got dropped, but that was only because they knew that I would get up off the ground and fight everyone on the planet.
So we get the whole thing that Nemo's submarine is super duper fast, because it's traveling around the world. So we get to Venice, and the Phantom is there, and the whole point of all of this falderall is there's going to be a meeting of world leaders to prevent a world war, and the Phantom doesn't want that to happen, so he's going to blow up Venice using Da Vinci's blueprints of the city, obviously.
Which, again, if he had just waited another 15 years, he really wouldn't have had to blow anything up. He could have saved all his bombs for the war.
Yes. And so the thing that happens that makes me go, just stop, is they roll up. And so based on the timeline of, like, what's going on, Quatermain went to London in July, and they're like, we have no time. And so they're talking about how quickly Nemo can move everybody around. At the latest, we are in, like, mid-August at this point, more or less. Maybe even September.
Okay.
And they're like, it's Carnival. Right. I'm like, look, there's one thing I know. Carnival has to do with Mardi Gras, has to do with Easter, has to do with Lent, has to do with Fat Tuesday, and that is in frickin' March or April.
Well, I mean, I feel like, given how loose they were with the timeline and this thing in general, jumping off by a couple of months is pretty bang on the money, but that's probably a bullseye for this film. But that was a nice catch. That totally went right past me. I was just overawed by the shittiness of this film at every moment.
And so then we have kind of the big action sequence where we have to sort of stop this from being blown up. And so somehow this gigantic submarine does some Ant-Man shit and, like, shrinks down small enough to be able to go into the canals of Venice.
Yeah. Canals that are, like, tight for a couple of boatmen with those little skiffs, but this gigantic submarine that the sword of the ocean is making it in there.
Right. I was just like, they can't put cruise ships, like, they're having the whole cruise ship problem now. I think they've stopped letting cruise ships in there, which was a terrible idea. But I'm like, okay, never mind. Moving on. They manage. And so this is where we have that rocket shot out of the submarine happen to stop the Phantom from successfully chain reactioning, blowing up Venice. And that was another thing that cracked me up. It's like, it talks about sort of a care in construction of Venice and some regularity that they were able to create a chain reaction somewhere, somehow.
The fact that, number one, they're destroying every town that they go into, which we haven't really discussed, but I mean, they mangled Paris trying to capture Jekyll and Hyde, and Venice fares no better from their time there.
And so not only can you destroy Venice with a chain reaction, somehow Tom Sawyer is driving Nemo's car down these wide, straight, flat roads in Venice?
Yeah, well, roads. Roads in Venice would not have been a thing, because they barely have roads in Italy now. Like, the roads in Italy in, like, the turn of the century didn't exist. I mean, there weren't roads in most places, but the first places for it to happen was certainly not in Italy, and Venice has never been one to invest that hard in their infrastructure.
Yeah, it's like the original walking city. There's not even anything mildly, closely, barely resembling roads. I mean, moving around there with a handcart or a wheelbarrow is kind of tricky.
And there's people everywhere you go. I mean, this would have been Death Race 2000. He would have killed half of Venice just trying to drive around. Plus, that car is, like 30 feet long?
Yes.
That makes a Yukon look tiny.
I mean, every single movie ever filmed in Venice, people are going like, upstairs, over bridges, downstairs, down the other set of bridges, like dodging, like walking sideways through alleys to get from point A. Like there's no such thing as a straight line in Venice, much less one wide enough for that car.
Yeah, find a doorway that's plumb and level, and we will have a celebration about it.
Right. I mean, it is a quirky, charming destination of all time. So, yeah, that I was like, yeah, come on, stop it.
Just stop.
So they managed to stop this chain reaction, and Tom Sawyer miraculously is thrown clear of the car, and he recovers, and they come back to Nemo's sub, and...
Also, this car sustains no damage at any time. He smashes into every goddamn thing that there is, and that car doesn't even get a scratch on it. And I found that to be probably the most irritating thing in this entire film. This, for me, was like you with the bonnets. I could not handle the fact that there was no scratches on this car.
But yeah, everybody goes back to starts heading back to the submarine, and Ishmael, Nemo's right-hand guy, I mean, the fact that they went with the call me Ishmael, I'm like, oh, okay. So the right-hand guy, he figures out, like, who stole the formula, and he comes out to tell everybody that it was Dorian Gray, and he gets shot, and I was like, poor guy, like, he was actually a good dude. He did not deserve that. That was the one person I felt sorry for in this whole rigmarole.
Is that a reference to Noah, or not Noah, the other fish story?
Moby Dick.
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah, and Melville actually, yes, purposefully chose the biblical name.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. Anyway, so they managed to not blow up Venice, and we get the classic Scooby-Doo thing where Quartermain finds the Phantom and, like, tears off his mask, and under his mask he has a second mask.
Oh, yes, he's wearing... this one, I didn't even Google it because I was done. I just broke my brain with all the Googling. I didn't Google when did latex... latex prosthetics for film come about, but I don't think they existed then.
Who knows? Who cares? Doesn't matter.
Yeah, but this guy had latex prosthetics on his face to make him look like Doctor Doom, which because he's M. The whole thing's so stupid.
Yeah.
God, it's dumb.
But the double Scooby-Doo-ness of it, just like, oh, just good Lord. And yeah, and it's totally playing into, like, there's a secret society that's manipulating the world, and we have to worry about the secret society instead of just fixing actual problems we have at home.
I will say that that is kind of timely for 2003. That was back when the History Channel and everybody would not shut up about the Freemasons and the aliens and ancient aliens, that dickhead with his hair.
Oh, yeah, the alien Freemasons. Yeah, good God, yeah.
Yeah, we certainly couldn't have brewed a bunch of beer and built those pyramids. Had to have been aliens.
It was aliens. Blech. But yeah, that whole, like, supervillains are really coordinating and running the world and somehow managing to manipulate millions and possibly billions of people. Have you met people? Have you tried to ever organize people on a large scale?
Keeping it all a secret the entire time.
Yeah. Oh, yes, keeping it a secret.
Yeah, because everybody's so good at keeping things secret.
Yeah. So after that idiocy, we're back on the submarine, and we get a little bit of fun science again with that invisible, inaudible world where that record player, which I thought this was a little bit of fun business, where they're playing the record that has sounds that, like, humans can't hear. The animalistic side of Jekyll and Hyde. Hyde is like, oh, I can hear it. And they're like, this is activating these crystal transistor bombs, because radios and, like, the whole crystal radio thing was like, people were kind of figuring that out.
Like, it was perfect for that. Like, and plus people were very, very deep into doing experiments into audio and resonance and things like that, because that led directly into computing.
Yeah. No, there was a lot of stuff going on, and just that sort of that hidden world feeling was very cool. And so that's why you get people, like, trying to photograph fairies and stuff. Like, the early experiments, I'm like all for. But the thing is, when you figure out, like, this isn't a thing and it doesn't exist, or it's not a thing and it doesn't exist using these parameters, it's like, it's time to move on.
Yeah, it's not a conspiracy. Nobody's covering it up. We figured it out, and we just don't know about it. So, which seems to be most things that people are like, oh, well, this is a conspiracy. And it's like, I don't even have time to explain to you why it's not a conspiracy. You're just a fucking moron. Let's move on with our lives.
But because we're on a submarine, we are legally required by world law to have the thing where there's a leak where you have to lock men in to the chamber.
Yeah, I don't know what movie made that a rule, but maybe it was that U-boat movie that came out in the 80s.
No,
Das Boot.
Yeah, no, the submarine thingy has been a thing ever since that they've been making submarine movies. I mean, like, that's the one guaranteed, like, there's going to be a problem, and that's how it's going to go. So we have...
The men are going to be trapped behind the bulkhead door, pounding on it. Please let me out so I don't drown.
And so, somebody has to, like, yank a lever, and Hyde's like, I'll do it. And so this is my favorite. He jumps into the turbulent water and then drinks his formula. I'm like, what if you drop it? What if you spill it? Like, there is time to drink it when you're on stable ground and then jump in the hole. But okay, whatever. Fine.
Also, how the fuck do you drink anything underwater? I've never tried it, but I'm certain that you would drown.
No, he drinks it before he dives down.
Oh, okay.
But he is like, he is like down there, and he like has the bottle, and he jumps in, and he's like holding onto something. And I don't know. I guess it was they're like, we have to build tension here, but it just bothered me. So yeah, he goes full Hulk it out.
Also, for all the continuity bullshit that they apparently tried to put into this, they never nailed down how much time Hyde gets on his formula. And he even talks about, like, oh, that guy's formula is going to run out later. And, like, but he knows in his head, allegedly, how long this is supposed to last. Like you said, he could have just, that extra 10 seconds was not going to matter. He could have drunk it and then jumped in.
Yeah. And he swims to the bottom, and he pulls the lever, and yay, everything's okay.
He did it nice.
And then, we're doing redemption through sacrifice and good acts, and I'm like, I don't know. But we also get, along with there's a leak, and somebody needs to go behind.
Oh, don't you deny him his hero's arc.
Right, the scary door. We also have the submarine breaching. They were feeling really jealous about the Hunt for Red October about that one.
That is another Sean Connery gem, wasn't it?
Yeah. That was actually...
There's another film I'll never watch again.
Okay, I enjoyed that film. I had fun with it.
I'm full up on Connery after this. And like I said, I saw that interview with Barbara Walters right after we finished recording part one, where he was like, yeah, I always slap a woman. And she's like, really? You want to slap me? I wanted her to fight him so bad.
Oh, God. But there was one of these lines. I'm like, I don't think you understand how writing works. Somebody says, we're the tortoise to his hare, so we're doomed. I'm like, did you ever read the fable? Because the tortoise wins. It just takes a minute. But after the submarine breaches, they just show people, like, setting up tables. There's, like, no broken glass. There's not, like, all sorts of liquids sort of oozing around and sloshing about in this perfectly white submarine interior. I'm like, the table fell over. That's what we had to fix.
It was, this made Star Trek's, like, obsessive cleanliness look positive. It looked like dirty space compared to the inside of this. What could their cleaning crew had to be going 24 hours a day? They were just constantly off camera, just clean.
Yeah.
Bleach it.
And so apparently somehow some people got hurt because they do have the, like, people, being stitched up and padded and everything. And somehow Mina has a nurse outfit because she's the girl, so she has to dress up like a nurse. I'm like, oh, okay.
Well, don't you travel everywhere with a nurse's outfit and, like, a French maid outfit?
And didn't we just see, like, right? 2 scenes ago that seeing blood, like, makes her lose her shit?
Yeah, but here she is. She's gonna patch him up. Maybe she'll, get a little snack in here and there.
But, yeah. But then we get some more Ant-Man shit, and apparently somehow the submarine's able to go up these rivers from, I guess they're in the Pacific now, into the lakes of Mongolia? What?
The rivers and lakes of Mongolia, they are not well traveled, But you have to watch out for Mongolian sandworms. Is a big problem. They very similar to the ones in Tremors. They will get you. You have to be careful in the waterways of Mongolia.
But I was just like,
people think it's a desert, but that's what they want you to think.
I mean,
it's a conspiracy.
There are lakes, there are waterways. I mean, you can't have grasslands with zero water.
Oh, yeah, there's Lake Baikal and stuff like that, but you're not taking a fucking submarine up to it.
No. I was just like, okay, so somehow we get up there, whatever, and they pull the thing and like, hey, look, a peasant settlement. They must have run away because they were scared. I'm like, or the people who live in Mongolia are nomads and this is a summer camp and this is not where they hang out in the winter, but whatevs.
Yeah, no, it does not look like a place you really want to winter. Not great for skiing. I didn't see any hot chocolate anywhere, so they definitely should pass on that one.
Yeah. And so somehow they...
0 stars. 0 stars.
It's probably one of those places where you have to walk up the mountains. There are no ski lifts. But yeah, somehow they managed to sneak up on this quasi-Indian Mughal-looking industrial palace hidden, as you said, in the mountains of Mongolia.
The very, very well-traveled mountain. So I guess by Lake Baikal, there are mountains. However, that's not Mongolia. That's Kazakhstan. And it... Still, there's no fucking way to get tanks and steampunk robots and submarines and zeppelins and shit from that area. There's genuinely no way to get them from, unless you had the railway, but they hadn't built the Trans-Siberian Railway yet.
I mean, there is a lot of coal there. That's the one thing that I'm like, yeah, there is a shit ton of coal in Mongolia.
That's true. But I still feel like in this otherwise airtight plot, that is a small hole.
And so then they dress him up in Arctic explorer gear with goggles. That's how you know it's steampunk. And they tromp through the landscape to sneak up on this palace of mechanical wonders. And
they looked like they were going to fucking mount tauntauns and make an attack on the Imperial base, straight up on tauntauns. I didn't even think they were going to grab one AT-AT walker in that, but they were definitely kitted out from Luke Skywalker.
Yeah, I mean,
wearing the exact outfit.
Yeah,
they were on Hoth.
Except for the poorly knit hat that Sean Connery was wearing. None.
And no fucking gloves. No fucking. I know I'm yelling now, but no fucking gloves. That I was yelling when I watched it. I yelled again. Oh my god, I'm sorry for yelling, but I'm sure that's a nightmare for you on production. But good lord, no fucking gloves. It's. God only knows what the temperature is, but Sean Connery has just come from Africa.
Yes, and he's whiny about the temperature in 40-degree London, so can you... He's hot-blooded.
Sweating is what we do. This is Africa.
So they go into whatever the hell this structure is, and somehow there are giant stone statues of quasi-looking Mongols. I'm like, oh, here's the secret tomb of the Mongols that's not a thing. Okay, sure. What?
Yeah, why not? Now, there was an empire in this region. It was called the Karakazam Empire, and it was utterly wiped out by the Mongols because that was the biggest empire in the region, and Genghis Khan was like, hey, you know what's awesome? You're the king of the West, and I'm the king of the East. And the Emperor of Kharazm was like, who the fuck are you again? And then Genghis killed all of them and burned all their houses down and destroyed everything.
He really did have a thing against cities that stayed in one place.
Yeah, he was bitter. But they did have the first paved roads and the first wheeled conveyances in that city. So maybe this is in the basement of that, and they're worshiping the gods of the Karakazam.
Oh, okay. So that's ludicrous. We go inside, and there are scientists in there, and you know how we can tell there are scientists in there?
Lab coats.
There's people wearing... Yes!
Lab coats. I mean, you wouldn't have known Mina was trading people. We would have thought maybe she was just an idiot who was she was a stenographer or something. There's no way to know what she's doing unless she's wearing the outfit.
Right.
And you ladies apparently get very confused unless you're dressed exactly for the activity that you're pursuing.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's why we have so many changes of clothes. Dudes just need one suit because they can keep track of what they're doing.
It's the bigger brains, I guess.
Yeah. And the wandering uterus, as you said.
Oh, yeah, that plagues you daily.
But then we get, basically, it's time to fight. They start freeing the scientists, and each of the Avengers decides it's time to fight. So we get everybody getting to do their fight scene in different parts of the castle, I guess.
Because you know what's the best way? When you're a small force that's attacking a larger force, split up. You split up. Yeah, and that way you kind of denude all of the force that you might have into nothingness. And it works if you're planning on losing. It's a good way to win.
Hey, I watch a lot of Scooby-Doo cartoons, and they always split up and somehow manage to win, so...
Oh, well, there you go. This really was Scooby-Doo inspired, I guess.
But, yeah, so Mina gets to have her showdown with the man who wronged her, and it's just sort of a dumb vampire fight with a little gross rape joke thrown in there in the middle. I'm like, I
don't even remember that fight. It was so terrible. The only fight I remember is the terrible Hyde fight. They were all god-awful.
Oh, that one was terrible, too. Yeah. It's really hard to choose from which one was the most terrible. And the whole, lopsided, scary, exploded out muscle dude. Don't drink so much formula, no!
Yeah, but then his formula is supposed to burn out immediately because he chugged a whole, gallon of formula and turns into this giant misshapen Hulk man. But then his formula lasts just as long as Hyde's does. It makes no sense.
I don't know. Well,
and this is from the dude who gave us Blade. How do we go from the blood rain scene in the club where, with the vampires to this piece of shit? I just don't understand.
And so, you're sort of finding out that all of these different things, the invisibility ability, they've figured out how to mass produce that. It doesn't feel like they ever mass produced vampire stuff, but they mass produced some steampunk robots that they never used or explained. Right.
And
And they mass produce Hyde, yeah.
I'm curious, what the hell would they think that they were going to be operating these robots? How would they... That's the thing that I don't get. When they're putting robots in the steampunk stuff, how the hell are these things being operated?
Steam. Don't worry about it.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
But yes, we do get a flamethrower thrown in there, and the guy in the flamethrower suit is just... Or was that a robot? Or is that a guy in a flamethrower suit?
I don't know what that was. Did they have Waldos at this time, though? Could they have operated a robot via Waldo?
I have no idea. That's sort of mechanical history I have no idea about.
Okay, well, you're the science person, so here I am, just answer all the science questions, science lady.
What do I look like? A mechanical engineer? What?
You look like a goddamn scientist. You just don't have your lab coat on.
I'm so glad you can still see I have science knowledges, even though I'm not wearing my lab coat.
Well, it's because we've been working together so long. Now I don't need you to have the French maid outfit on to know that you're cleaning, or the nurse's outfit on to know that you're treating somebody. I can figure it out from context.
And I feel like this is sort of one of those movies where they start to do the interlaced fight scenes, so all of the fight scenes sort of get extended out longer and longer and longer as we go from this fight scene to that fight scene to that fight scene to that fight scene, and it's we're not okay, everybody's fighting
with unnecessary explanation every fucking step of the way. Every step of the way there's unnecessary explanation.
Yes, and we do get Mina gets to vindicate herself because she's the one who shows Dorian Gray his portrait, and he turns to dust, and at that point you're like, fine, finally, okay, it took so long to get there.
And here I'm going to come in again with another small hole in this otherwise airtight film. The painting painting was, in comparison to the paintings we saw in the Vincent Price film that we reviewed, it was terrible. It was terrible. Those paintings were phenomenal.
It looked like a GQ shoot. It didn't look like a period painting at all.
And it wasn't even gross. The paintings in that other film were really unnerving and weird. And that was a TV film. And this is a movie made for Hollywood, and that painting was trash.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was just. Yeah, it very much looked like something you would find on the wall of a Halloween haunted house in your neighborhood, kind of thing.
Yeah, that one of the high school kids who was one of the better high school painters did.
Yeah, but at this point, whatever. So M sort of comes out.
It's weird that they phoned it in on that, though. Of all the things, I mean, this has been a plot point through the whole goddamn film, and they just completely phoned it in.
Well, it wasn't going to be on screen for that long, so I don't know. We get M kind of running out of there, and he's got his cool-looking leather and wood case with the hide formula and the Mina vampire blood, which, like, we never saw extra vampires, but whatever. The Invisible Man stuff, and I love it. Nemo's Science, and it's just like a pile of blueprints. I'm like, wait a second. I thought Mina was the scientist, but all you're taking is the vampire.
Well, didn't they steal all those scientists from Nemo?
I thought they were going around Europe stealing them.
Oh, I thought they were Nemo's stolen scientists.
You know what? We've spent enough time trying to figure that out. We can just move on.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that goddamn movie at least 4 times now. I will not watch another minute of it to find out the answer to that. I won't even read the Wikipedia. I think we've covered this film as far as it needs to be covered. I mean, we're going to finish it, but...
Yeah. But yeah, so M, Moriarty, et cetera, has this thing. He jumps out of the tower window, and this is where you get to talk about flight suits or not flight suits. And
yes.
He hang glides out of the tower window after stabbing Sean Connery. Thank God.
This was another one where, because I do appreciate the what-ifery going on here. I mean, they stretched it as far as it could go, but like the idea that like the concept was there, maybe it could have worked. The first wingsuit that was tested in the 20th century was tested in 1912, and the guy who did it was he went to the top of the Eiffel Tower. He was a little trepidatious before he jumped. But then, like, he had his, I guess, at some point, he was sure that he was going to make it to the ground. And he did. But he put a very big hole in the ground.
Ow. Ugh.
So I don't think that M would have made it very far. But he might have left a nice hole in the ground. I didn't even know a human body could leave a hole in the ground, did you?
I did not. I guess it depends on the ground?
Yeah, maybe. I guess it wasn't paved around the Eiffel Tower back then. Which is weird to think about.
Yeah. So, and then we sort of get the handing over of the leading of the troop from Alan Quartermain to Tom Sawyer, and Tom Sawyer takes the shot, and I'm just sitting here going, he can die now, knowing that we've safely saved the leadership from not being another white dude.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Because who better to lead this troop of people who dislike each other than the guy who has been the least developed person in the entire film, and also the person who's interacted with the other members of the team the least. Why not make him the captain? Let's do that. That makes sense. The least.
Yes. And then somehow we take Alan Quartermain's body back to South Africa. I guess you could have packed it in a lot of ice and just...
Yeah, they just take a bunch of snow, throw it in a coffin on top of the body, and stick it in the sub. Sub's got to be air conditioned, right? Because subs in that time were totally air conditioned. They had great breather systems and everything.
So we get back to Africa. We have the burial service, and so isn't Mina a vampire? But this is taking place during the day?
Well, her tits are certainly not vampiric because they were exposed to the sun, which is literally got its elbows on top of their heads, just leaning on them like, yo, what's up? How you guys doing? I'm the sun. I'm just leaning on you. Like they're holding the sun up with their shoulders, and this lady has her breasts bared in the middle of Africa in 1899.
She's wearing a little hat. It's very cute.
Oh yeah, that little veil was adorable. It was very cute. And that would keep her face from getting sunburned, I bet.
No. She's just going to have funny patterns on it. And I guess I would have been like so eye-rolling about it.
Though.
Except they make a huge deal about her coming into the movie at the beginning. Well, she can't come until it's dark outside. I'm like, why? Why?
And then she's not just in the sun. She's in the most sun a person could experience.
And from what I know
It's
about
like high noon on the plains of Africa.
modern vampire lore, she should at least sparkle, shouldn't she?
Yeah, yeah. Something should be happening. She should be getting the vapors or something.
But yeah, we have a bunch of like quote unquote native African ceremonial something something, and oh, Africa will never let Quartermain die, and I'm like, oh, good zombie.
No, because they don't need a white man. They need that white man to come back and kill the rest of the lions and the rhinos, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you had mentioned maybe they were gonna like do like a trilogy or something. Oh, thank God that was the end of it all. Because,
can you imagine us having to go through more of these?
Nope.
My God! But Tom Sawyer did cock a loaded rifle and lay it on top of the grave of Alan Quartermain, just so some small child could pick that gun up and take it to school.
Well,
and that was really kind of
And the way, the shells were still being manufactured at that point, I wouldn't be surprised if that gun got hot enough, it would just discharge on its own.
That's true. And just maybe kill one of those kids at school without anybody having to fire it.
Okay. That was, wow. That was such a disappointing movie from such an gloriously interesting premise and a really good graphic novel.
I think it's way more fun to discuss than it is to watch.
Yeah.
And if the idea had just been that this man was giving us a piece of shit that we could tear to pieces, this would be an Oscar winner.
But instead, I wonder, so trying to think back, in 2000, had we started really getting into like cinematic universes for films? Was this sort of like the beginning of all of that?
No, because Blade was what resurrected Marvel Studios, and that came out in 2001. So this came out 2 years later, but like,
yeah,
Batman only came out in 89, and it had finished its first run, and there wasn't like any kind of universe surrounding it. So, yeah, that concept was still a little ways off. But they were trying to make this into a trilogy because that was a thing, and this guy had already made Blade. He turned down Blade 2. I think he might have turned down Blade 2 to make this piece of shit, in fact.
Okay.
Yeah, and so Blade 2 went to Guillermo del Toro.
All right, and the first Star Wars movie, yeah, the Phantom Menace terrible thing had come out in 1999, and so yeah, I think like this expanded world, the idea was there, but they kept doing a bad job of getting it going.
Yeah, this was around the same time that we got Wild Wild West as well, which I never thought I would say, but is a vastly superior film to this. I never thought I'd say Wild Wild West was vastly superior to anything, but I mean, I caught a little bit of Wild Wild West the other day. It was just happened to be on TV, and I enjoyed myself. I was enjoying it. Yeah.
Okay.
So there might be something there, but I think the fun in this movie is the thing that I could not stop doing, which was coming up with a IRL League of Extraordinary Gentle People. This was such a fun thing to do. I had so much fun with it. I take it you enjoyed yourself just
Yes, we had so much more fun doing that than actually watching the movie, and we did it in the wrong order, I think. At least I made my list, and I was all really happy about it, and then I watched the movie, and I was like, oh God. I think I should have watched the movie first and then consoled myself.
Well, you are not locked in until you speak the list, so we can get started on it, and you can make your adjustments on the fly, I suppose.
Nah, I did make some adjustments afterwards because I realized my Moriarty world schemer person wasn't terrible enough. So I did change that for sure.
Oh, all right. So are we going to start with the bad guy, or where are we starting?
Why don't we just sort of go in order of who, as they were introduced in the movie. So, Alan Quartermain is our first one, and the thing that makes him special is he can really shoot a gun from real far away and hit stuff.
Yes, he is the team sharpshooter. He is the Hawkeye of the bunch.
Yeah. So for me, it was obviously Annie Oakley, because she was among other things, she was one of the very first people that I heard of in elementary school that like, this is a woman hero you can look up to. And I just thought she was dang cool.
Oh, that's awesome. I did not know that this had kind of that that kind of hitting you in the feels kind of thing, but that is very fun. I don't know who the first female hero I ever heard of was, but I personally had to pick your person's teammate / competitor, Lillian Smith. And so where Annie Oakley had kind of a Buffalo Bill type vibe, right?
Yeah. She wore buckskin. She was rough and tumble. She really advertised herself because she kind of was, girl on the frontier. And she had supported her family by, shooting game and selling it. And she was able to sell it for a premium because they knew she would shoot the birds in the head. Because this is something we don't think about, that back then, a lot of the birds that people ate were shot. And a lot of them just had buckshot just kind of in them. And so people were screwing up their teeth all the time on it.
Yeah, and if you cracked a tooth back then, it was not a good time. It was not a good time.
Oh.
Yeah, they would just yank the tooth. And
yeah, or people wouldn't get their tooth pulled because they're like, this is going to be horrific. So you can actually die of a cavity that abscesses. And the abscess is basically you get a big bacterial infection in your face and then you go into septic shock and so.
Yeah, and that led to some really weird medical theories back in the day about bad teeth, but that led to people having all their teeth pulled.
Right.
But so the person that I picked, because you had already picked the one, so I picked the one who's next to the one, and so both of the women on this team and Buffalo Bill, so Annie Oakley and Lillian Smith and Buffalo Bill were all considered to be the best shooters on their crew. Like, they kind of all took turns being the best. So I think either way we go here, nobody's going to lose. And I love the fact that you have a Buffalo Bill-styled female, and I have an American Indian. She's a faux Sioux sharpshooter.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I didn't know that she was going with, sort of the noble savage angle.
Oh, yeah, it was so popular back then. And I think that because Annie Oakley was already on the crew and had gone with the buckskin cap look, she
was the cowboy. Lillian had to be the Indian. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Plus it gave her more of a gimmick because, the spirits of the shaman had gifted her with this amazing sharpshooting power.
Okay.
So it gave her a mystical aspect as well. But she was really just the daughter of some Quakers from New England. Very much like Larry the Cable Guy. Dude from New England who, kind of took a redneck gimmick.
Okay, so Ellen Quartermain, step aside for some cool women. Nemo, the transport science dude. Who are you going to replace him with?
All right, I am going with Isambard Kingdom Brunel, the man who Britain actually voted. All of Britain voted, and they declared him the second most important person in the history of Britain. He was the first man to tunnel under a navigable river. He created the first transatlantic steamship. He created the first propeller-driven iron steamship that was also the largest ship ever built. So he had this awesome ship that was called the SS Great Eastern. And it was a huge iron-hulled ship that had these big steam paddles on either side and then a screw in the back as well. And it had like a 9,000 horsepower engine. And it was faster than anything. And so... but it cost so much to run, and people were scared of the new technology, so it didn't quite make the money it should have made. But he created the Great Western Railroad in the UK in order to connect all of the UK, and then he envisioned these ships as a way to extend that railroad to the United States and connect to their railroad that connected to the Pacific Ocean. So he was a very big-minded guy, and he was probably the closest thing we'll get to a Nemo in the real world, especially since there was not a problem this man could not solve with engineering. He was a genius.
So he was very around the world in 80 days. He's like, I'm going to make that happen.
For real. And he was actually kidnapped by the Russians and forced to make their metro station, which I think you've seen, right? It's a gorgeous metro station. It's probably the only gorgeous thing in Moscow.
They're like walking into an opera house. It's insane, and you can tell that the czars were still involved with Russia at the time that they were building these, because it's all sort of vanity and it makes no sense, but it's real pretty.
Yeah, and he based it all on the London Underground. They saw the London Underground, and Tsar Nicholas II was like, do that. or you die. And he was like, all right.
But with chandeliers.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's Russian, so they have to have everything gilded and made as crazy and like, all right, let's make it even more tacky than the Greeks would.
So even though Nemo was sort of the scientist guy, really all he basically got used for in the movie was to just move people around. Mm-hmm. And so I started thinking of him as sort of logistics guy. And so I went with, instead of a particular person, somebody who was a compilation of a bunch of people. In the movie The Woman King, General Nansika, you'd think about any general has to be a logistics person because you have to figure out how to get people and their stuff to the right place at the right time.
Any good general. General.
Fair enough.
Yes. General Santana springs to mind as soon as you said logistics and generals.
Yes, there are some generals who are...
He bought gold buttons instead of bullets for his troops.
Hey, sometimes it's just important to think about morale, Jamie.
That's true. You got to look fly.
But I particularly chose her also because just like Nemo sort of being from a mysterious place in the movie, the whole Dahomey kingdom was sort of like this mysterious place that the West was running up against and going, what the hell is going on? And now we're very afraid of you. So, I don't know.
Yeah, the Dahomean wars with the French were amazing, and there were some real badasses in that. And I love the fact that there were real life Amazons in the 19th century. So, and plus those women in that film trained so hard. Everybody goes on and on and on about the guys in 300, but the women who were in The Woman King were in just as good shape, if not better. Like they looked like they were going to hurt people. They didn't look like they were there to flex and look pretty. They looked like they were there to tear people's heads off, and they could do it.
And another one up on 300, whereas those guys were wearing some bullshit outfits made up for a comic book, the indigo dyed and patterned cloth that they were wearing in The Woman King was historically accurate. Like the whole tradition of using indigo to make all of these special fabrics in West Africa particularly is... It's long, and you can actually find documentation of it. I mean, that was super cool, too.
That's awesome.
Okay, so after we get Quartermain...
The Woman King's going to have to be something we'll have to cover at some point, because that does fall into our purview.
Yes.
And, I'm totally with you on the way you set up your transport person, but because I needed Brunel's tech, I put my General Nansika in a different spot. So, yes.
Okay. All right, so after Nemo, we get Rodney Skinner, the annoying thief dude.
He is... Well, so I just went with a sneaky person there. I was trying to get a spy. Yeah. Is that what you did as well?
No, I went with a totally different thing. So tell me about your sneaky person.
Alrighty, I went with Mata Hari. Are you familiar with Mata Hari?
I know her as kind of like a theatrical character, but wasn't she also a real person?
Yes, she was a person. She was one of the hottest women of the 19th century. She was really, really well known as a courtesan, a dancer. She was basically a model. She was, for all intents and purposes, like the Kim Kardashian of that era, really, in terms of like how many people were thirsty for this woman.
So was she a spy, or did she just make people think she was a spy? Now I'm confused.
She was not simply a spy. So she was a French woman who went. Her family moved to Indonesia. She got married there. And she was basically adopted by the Indonesians. They loved her, and she loved their culture. And I guess tanned well. Or she wasn't French. I apologize. She was Dutch. And so she tanned well. She learned to belly dance. And they gave her the name Mata Hari, which was a takeoff of her original name.
Okay.
And so when she went back to Europe, she lived in France. She was living as a courtesan because her husband had died. And that's how hot women were able to make their way back then. And so she was having sex with all these very, very high-level, like, potentates and diplomats and warriors.
Okay,
and she was
the
entertaining
billionaire
them.
class of their day, yeah.
Exactly, and it was the beginning of World War One. So the French government asked her to spy on the Germans because they wanted to get the crown prince on their side so that they could undermine the Germans. And they offered her
Sure.
$1 million francs to do it. And so she's
That's
trying
a lot of money.
a lot of money. So she's trying to make this connection. She can't really make the connection, and while she's doing it, the Germans pick her up, and they force her to start becoming a double agent. So what she does is she feeds them just random cafe talk from Paris, because she's like, yeah, sure, Germans, whatever you guys want. And the French get pissed off because they've gotten their ass whipped by the Germans for so many battles in World War One, and they have to blame somebody, so let's blame the slut. And they blamed the slut, and then they hung her because she was a double agent. And so it was an ignominious end, but this woman, she was the opposite of Skinner. She didn't blend in, but she was so hot and so in your face, she could go wherever she wanted.
So I went with somebody who sort of was invisible to the world and made connections. I mean, they went on about Skinner being, this lovable rogue that, oh my God, who loved him? Everybody was just like,
he was the biggest piece of shit in the movie.
Yeah. But I went with a woman named Marianne Perret-Pulse, who was originally married to Lavoisier, who was like a big dude in taking chemistry from alchemy to the sort of this systematic science. But he couldn't have done it without his wife. She also understood chemistry, but she was also a polyglot. She was able to speak French, obviously, but German, English, and Latin, because Latin was sort of the language, if you wanted to get your scientific discoveries out to everybody, that was sort of the language everybody could communicate in. And so she was able to take papers that people were writing in English and German and Latin and translate them into French, and then also critique the science for Lavoisier. And then she was able to take his French writings and send them out into the world in English and German and Latin.
Which is awesome. She reminds me a lot of Muhammad's first wife, who created the library, and she collated all this scientific information and then redistributed it in different languages. So that's awesome.
But again, because, she's just the translator or whatever, she gets alighted from a lot of the record. But without her, a lot of things just wouldn't have happened. What I find really funny is for her second act after Lavoisier died, she married the guy who was Count Rumford. And so in early 19th century America, you have the rise of something called the Rumford stove or the Rumford fireplace, which was a bunch of physics to make fireplaces better. And so you'll find them all over New England generally.
Oh, is that with the little kerjigger in the middle of the chimney to make the smoke go out, so
and then it's also
the
angle, sort of the way the sides particularly angle.
Okay.
Yeah, because he was sort of figuring out that energy was something that moved around. This was still definitely in the ages of phlogiston. I don't know. They were confused, but it was a good starting point.
Well, they thought cells were homuncules at the same time too, right? Like tiny little animals.
Aristotle.
Well, if it wasn't for Aristotle, they wouldn't have. Aristotle wrote in Greek, but all the texts that they were learning from initially were in Latin, right? Like there would be no science without the works in Latin, I guess.
There was some Latin. There was also some Greek. There was a whole bunch of Persian, and so the people who could read Persian, and there just weren't very many. But a lot of the stuff that sort of leaked out of the Latin world, because the Latins were great adapters and updaters of technology that already existed, and we decided we needed to fight each other more than we needed to learn anything. And so it was the Persians who were holding up that end of the world for a while.
And thankfully they did that.
Okay, so that's invisible. Then Mina Harker walks on the scene, and she's billed as a straight-up scientist. So I went with a straight-up scientist, Fritz Haber, who is responsible for turning...
Death.
Also, yes. But, but really where he started was taking atmospheric nitrogen and turning it into ammonia so you could use it in fertilizer, which was super important and a good news for all of the prisoners who were working on all of the bird guano islands out in different locations and dying there in horrible ways, because that was one of the ways that they were getting ammonia in bulk. And so to be able to turn just the nitrogen in the air into fertilizer was great. Unfortunately, what else can you turn fertilizer into besides food?
Bombs, as we know from all of our domestic terrorists of the 1990s.
Yeah. So a lot of people look at Fritz Haber as the father of chemical warfare because of that, but I like to think that, he just wanted to help make fertilizer, and it all got out of his hands. But he did definitely prolong World War I by providing the Germans with fertilizer so they didn't starve as fast. I don't know. It's just all depressing. All right. So who is your scientist?
So I was feeling a little Ocean's 11 about this one, and I needed a computer programmer for this. So I went with Ada Lovelace.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
She was another world changer.
The world's first computer programmer. Daughter of Lord Byron. And
he knows what he did.
So we know she was a goth, and we also know that her mom pushed her into science because she didn't want her to become a depressive, psychotic mess like her dad, and it did not work at all. But she became an amazing mathematician and gave us the basis of what would come to become computer programming while working for Charles Babbage on his mechanical calculator.
Sometimes I wonder, pushing her into science where she could only get so far and was always going to be kind of harassed by the men scientists, probably couldn't have helped her mental health either.
No, based on the fact that you said you were being harassed in the 1990s, I cannot imagine the 1890s went well for her at all.
No, I mean, she did have rich lady armor on, and she was in the nobility, but that's not gonna help. Yeah, anytime any dude says, oh, well, I can't be a misogynist because I'm happily married, I have a wife and a daughter, I'm like, yeah, Lord Byron had a wife and a daughter too, so that doesn't really count for much.
Was he a misogynist?
I do think he treated women particularly well.
Oh, I don't know a great deal about him, so...
He definitely lived in a time when women were objects to be thrown around and shared instead of thought of as actual whole people.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, there weren't a lot of people who thought that women were actual whole people until recently.
Right. But the fact that the two main women in his life went to great lengths to invent whole new things. I mean, Mary Shelley invented the science fiction novel, and his daughter invented computing just so they wouldn't have to spend time with him, is the way I look at it. That's what he did. So
wow. Jesus.
I realize that's like a complete oversimplification and a squashing a lot of facts. But still.
Still. It still holds.
Okay, so we've got Dorian Gray, who they go to pick up in his medieval house down by the docks, and his whole shtick is he's been everywhere, he's seen everything, he has connections everywhere, he's the fixer, he's the diplomat, even though he turns out to be the evil guy. My pick was Jane Digby, who was a courtesan from England. She managed to hang out with just a bunch of the movers and the shakers and the state making and diplomacy part of the world in the early 19th century. And then she managed to get a real nice landing. She married a sheikh as her third or fourth husband and just, spent the rest of her life in more than oriental splendor, to borrow a phrase.
This woman's amazing. Her story is so cool because she starts out like Lola Montez and then ends up Lawrence of Arabia. It's so dope. Yeah. I can't believe there's no movie about this woman. I mean, you keep mentioning amazing women, but Annie Oakley, we could pass on that fucking movie for a Jane Digby movie. Why don't we have one?
I mean, all of these people, that you just... And all we're doing is just like lifting the corner of their biographies. They've got so much going on. It's too cool. So who is your kind of diplomat fixer person?
So if I was just going on a pretty boy, I would pick a different person that I did pick. And I'm only going to mention this guy because my readership doesn't, or my listenership doesn't know about him, and you do, and all of your people do. But men who have not read a romance novel have no idea who Beau Brummel is. And I just have... Well, do you want to tell who Beau Brummel is? Because you probably know better than I do.
Scandalous trousers. Oh, my goodness. So... so... Sort of the thing to know about the pants that men were wearing in these days, they had very loose butts, basically. And the way that because like they had seams and everything everywhere, and these guys were climbing stairs and riding horses, and so you just wanted sort of all of this roominess in there. Also, so the seams, as you have mentioned before, wouldn't irritate your sensitive bits.
Yes, because there was no undies.
So some people were doing some sort of like loincloth kind of thing. But anyway, so Beau Brummel decides that tight pants are where it's at. And yes, he was like super into like tailoring for jackets. And instead of doing like the big loose floppy shirts that everybody had, he had a bunch of rules about hats and neckerchiefs and shoes. But at the time, the stir that he was causing were with the tight trousers. And so you could see what a guy was working with. That's how tight those pants were.
Well, he was also so pretty that like, and I mean, this guy was an influencer of influencers, and he had this, back in the day, people would wear this like, it wasn't a tie so much, it was like a kerchief that they would tie around their neck. And a lot of people spent a lot of time doing like this real artful bow and things like that. Well, this guy made he made an entire career out of, well, aside from his ass, his career was people would come and watch this man tie his cravat because he would do it in this, like, it was like the girl version of bedhead, like doing the hot girl bedhead thing.
Oh, okay.
Where your hair looks wind tossed, but it's not. And so he would do this like wind tossed tie that looked real like casual and fast tied, but it often took him like a half hour to get right. And people would just show up and stare through his window and watch him tie this tie. Like he was that big a deal. So I thought that this guy would just be fun to mention. If there was a Dorian Gray, this guy would be it. Because he was vain as hell, he was pretty as hell, and people would step to when he told them to, even though he was a commoner.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But the person who I actually chose for this position, like I said, so you had we had a pirate as the original, as Nemo, and I picked a pirate for this because in the 19th century, there was a person who was more powerful than anyone else on the planet, and they were not a male, and they were not white. That person's name was Qing Shi. Zheng Yisao was her married name. She was called Qing Shi. She was a Chinese pirate who controlled 4,000 ships at one point, and
Holy cow.
Then so she took out. She had this huge army of pirates from Guangdong, and it was a confederation, and she managed to get. She conquered the Qing Navy, took a bunch of their ships. Then she beat the British East India Company, took 2,000 of their ships. It took a blockade by the entire Portuguese Navy and an offer of amnesty to every one of her troops, allowing her to keep her own private army and private fleet, and giving them rewards, money, pork, and wine if they would quit. And that's the only way that these pirates gave up their shit. She still had 24 ships under her command after she surrendered. She was still running an armada as a gangster-ass queen of pirates even after she won. It was so gangster. And then she married her first, first mate love guy because her husband, the Pirate King, had died. And he just became like the most notorious brothel owner in all of China. And she lived to be 70, which is insane.
Okay, old pirates. Now that is crazy.
She led these assaults, by the way. This was not like she wasn't ordering it from the back. She was in the front ship, fucking people up. Gangster.
That is crazy.
Yep.
I'm also going to have to poke around and see if there's a good C drama that covers her. Because there are a bunch of naval stories in Chinese drama, and I would be amazed if they don't have one about her.
There is a phenomenal episode of You're Dead to Me by BBC Sounds. That's where I originally learned about her. And there is an Asian pirate musical.
Okay.
There is a TV show called The Captain of Destiny, where she's in Doctor Who, a 2022 episode of Doctor Who, The Legend of the Sea Devils.
Okay.
She is in season 2 of Our Flag Means Death.
Oh, no shit.
Yep.
That's
and
awesome.
That is it.
Cool. So, yeah, we've got, she was going around kind of running her end of the world, and that's a lot of the world to run, for sure.
Yeah. When it took the combined navies of China, Portugal, and England just to get her to say, well, how about you give me some money and some food and some drink, and then maybe I'll think about quitting. That is so gangster, it's crazy. It's just, she was the most powerful.
All right, so unfortunately everybody does know Tom Sawyer, even though he had the most transparent characterization in the movie. So I replaced him with Calamity Jane.
Well, how the fuck do we not know that Tom Sawyer didn't just grow up to be a bank teller or some shit? I didn't get any idea in the books, while he was whitewashing that fence with lead paint, that he was going to do anything other than die of lead poisoning at a young age. I just don't understand how the hell this character became what he became, but here we are.
No, he wasn't using lead paint. The stuff that people use to whitewash, it was a limestone mixture.
Oh, okay. Well, then, there you go.
Yeah, and that's why you had to do it kind of every couple of years. But, yeah, I mean, Tom Sawyer's entire purpose was to be places so stuff could happen and he could see it happen.
And so Americans would say, there's an American, so we like this, which is sad.
But Calamity Jane was an actual person. I don't think she used that name during her lifetime, or a couple other people did. Let's see, Wild Bill Hickok used that about her. But she, grew up kind of on the frontier. She worked as a scout for the U.S. Army. She was another sharpshooter. She also ended up working for a time in dance halls as, a dance hall girl, so probably a prostitute, because once again, if you are an independent woman on your own on the frontier, that was one of the few ways that, you could have any sort of steady living.
Ooh, from the accounts that I have read, she was a handsome woman, so I can't imagine she was commanding a great deal of cash.
Have we talked about what the ratios were of men to women in some of these towns?
Yeah. And there was Madame the Mustache, who was the most famous prostitute at the time. If they were having sex with a woman with a mustache, they probably didn't care if Calamity Jane had a face or not.
And she also drove stagecoaches. So, yeah, she probably had... she was probably able to take out quite a few guys who were going to give her a hard time.
So was Calamity... I grew up thinking Calamity Jane's legend was overblown. And maybe that's revisionist males being dickheads. Is that the case? Or she actually was the badass we're giving a believe?
Not particularly. No, she was definitely a badass. The U.S. Army does not hire you to work as a scout if you can't handle yourself.
Cool. Well, then I'm glad that I have been corrected.
But there's the guys who don't believe that women were hauling around 50 pounds of grain on the regular running flour mills either. So I don't know. What are you going to say?
I don't know. Until we build a time machine, I guess we'll never know.
I don't know, but some of those pictures of those women, those strong women that you've got, seem to say otherwise.
That is true.
And besides, as we talked about recently, laundry will make you strong whether you want it to or not, because that is some hauling you're doing.
Those people back then must have had some grip strength like chimpanzees.
Oh, woo. So who is your replacement for our rather transparent Tom?
I went with the greatest lawman to ever live, Bass Reeves, who has recently gotten a TV show on Paramount Plus, which I have yet to watch. But Bass Reeves was actually a freed slave who mostly hunted white fugitives in the Oklahoma territories.
Huh.
He was a bad man. He was he was very well known to fight more than one person at a time.
Interesting.
And whip everybody that he fought. Like, fighting 2 men at once was his thing. And he made over 4,000 arrests. He would just walk into white places and grab up a white man and drag him out. He did not give a fuck. And he was a bad man. And that's where we get the Lone Ranger from.
Okay, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Whoa. Okay, so not only were the first cowboys in America black, there were plenty of black cowboys during the golden age of cowboys.
Yeah, and a lot of the a lot of the lawmen of the Old West were actually black, and we just never got any representation of them.
I can see that, because you certainly can't have them starring as John Wayne in movies if they're not white.
Yeah. Well, he did. I mean, John Wayne did play a very believable Genghis Khan. So let's not drag it too low. With a tan, he could be anybody.
Oh my God, the pictures of John Wayne as Genghis Khan are just, the blue eyes. Can't. I just can't. Okay, so...
Do you think he was ever ashamed of anything he did, John Wayne? I don't think he was.
Oh, no.
I think he just got drunk.
I just don't think he thought about it too hard. But if we want to talk about terrible transformations, we have our Jekyll and Hyde. Who is your transformerator?
Well, I was originally going with a 2-man team to go with Jekyll and Hyde, but I feel like it's just cheap. So I'm going to go with one guy. I'm going to go with one guy, and every one of the people who is listening to this who is a fan of my Plague of Strength stuff is going to think that I am going to say the Great Gama, who was an Indian wrestler of this era who was pretty much undefeatable. But he was only 5'8" and 250 pounds, which means that in a room full of people, you probably would not see him over everyone else, which is why I picked a guy.
Be huge.
I mean, tall, the man is wide, and his legs were thick. He was super strong. He was a badass. But like when you're looking for a heavy, especially in a movie or something like that, or when you're going to be a gangster, or when you're a celebrity and you have a bodyguard, you pick a person who is huge, so they stick up out of the crowd, and people go, "I should not fuck with that mountain of a man." And so I picked Ivan Poddubny, who was 6'2", 275 pounds. He was a Russian who was phenomenally strong, and he had humongous biceps, and he was an occasional world champion in wrestling and was a badass Russian fighter on top of that. So he would have been the guy that would have stopped any nonsense that might have started.
Okay, so you went with the Hyde side. I guess I went with the Dr. Jekyll side and chose Marie Curie, mainly because she was the one who really brought radioactivity into the world. And so we could get the transformation story of Bruce Banner and the Incredible Hulk. You can draw a straight line from her to him.
Well, and really, I mean, it works perfectly because I picked a Russian strongman and you picked a person who Russian strongmen love because they can use radioactive shit to poison people now. So it's full circle. It works perfectly. Look at that.
And also I sort of think about Marie Curie. You know, here she was. She had not one, 2 Nobel Prizes, and yet people still expected her to go home and cook for her family. And how do we know that she did this? Because her cookbooks are radioactive.
Ooh, how about a little radium on that chicken? That would be delicious.
It gives you that special glow.
Oh, wow. Vladimir Putin's favorite inventor. Marie Curie.
Oh, my goodness. Finally, we've made it through our team of Avengers or whatever. And then we have to look at Moriarty, the Napoleon of crime, who, of course, was based on a criminal of the 19th century who was mainly an art thief.
Yeah, I've forgotten the guy's name, but I did look it up at some point. But for this movie, because in the movie, we're dealing with a guy who's trying to, bring about...
Take over the world.
Which is such a stupid... who wants that job?
Apparently some people, and all of the people who want it, they might want to take over the world, but then they don't want to run it, because that's hard.
Exactly. I feel like they're not thinking it through. They're just not thinking it through. There's a lot... Because there's too many, problems you got to fix just so you can start your day. It's too much. I'm not into it.
Right.
So who did you pick to ruin the world here?
So I had played around with the idea of Gertrude Bell, but
Okay.
mainly she was just a rich person who didn't really have a good grasp of how regular people live their lives and outside of England. And that's not that evil. That's just extremely normal for the 19th century and even now.
Is that any relation to Alexander Graham Bell?
No.
Is she his evil cousin? No?
No. But for somebody who truly did mess up the world, I went with King Leopold II of Belgium, who was one of the most bastardy bastards who ever bastarded.
Whew. And there's a nice foreshadow if you guys happen to go in and watch this movie because you hate yourself. At the beginning of the movie, where they're shooting automatic weapons, they say that it's unsporting. One of the guys comments that they must be from Belgium.
Must be the Belgium.
And so, why was Belgium so unsporting in this era?
Well, the thing was, it wasn't so much that Belgium was so terrible, it was that King Leopold was personally terrible.
Is he the guy who started the mayo with French fries thing? Because I am 100% on crucifying this man. No. Okay.
No, the real problem, see, as much as, colonialism was bad, and the East India Company was bad, and the Dutch VOC was bad, at least in all of those cases, those were more or less companies that benefited the country that was doing the colonizing in some way. That money from all of this horrible activity was going back and building schools for orphans and stuff occasionally.
Okay.
I'm not saying it was great. I'm just saying it could be worse. And King Leopold came up with a way for it to be worse.
Okay. It's nice. It's nice when people innovate, right?
Right. The entire colony of the Congo, which is most of what's the Democratic Republic of Congo today, was
lovely place from what I understand.
Personally owned by King Leopold II. And so all of the profits that came out of that were personally his, and all he did was use it for his own personal stuff. None of that went back into making Belgium a better country.
Well, I'm just skimming his Wikipedia page here, and it says Leopold's administration of the Congo Free State was characterized by atrocities and systematic brutality, including forced labor, torture, murder, kidnapping, and the amputation of the hands of men, women, and children when the quota of rubber was not met. And
his whole
point of order, people cannot harvest rubber without hands or feet.
Yeah, no, this was a total terror tactic. It's like, hey, if you don't do what I say you should do, this is what's going to happen to you. And so this also stopped people from organizing any sort of organized resistance, because it was just this completely brutal system. And he made a shit ton of money because as the world was steampunking along on its way to World War I, the use of rubber was just growing and growing and growing in this sort of mechanical age that was developing. He is one of the worst men. Oh, and he never went there.
So was he ever assassinated?
And you can trace a lot of modern Congo's problems today.
So we got the World Court sitting in Brussels, and they know that they've done this, and they're just like, well, that's our bad, but we're not going to do anything to fix it.
No, he just sort of died in his bed. If you do want to read about just how bad this is, there is a very good book written about it called King Leopold's Ghost. And it's sort of this is why southern, sort of sub-Saharan Central Africa is still such a disaster today. He basically killed half the country.
Well, if you guys are listening from Belgium, fuck you. All right, moving on.
See, it was just this one guy. It's not us. It was him. We never profited. Yeah. No, the mayonnaise on the French fries is the least of their problem. So who did you choose?
Nobody who had any particular hatred for the Belgians, but I will work on that. I'm really going to try to... And I had previously had Belgium real high on my list because they had the first gym that was for the public that wasn't a German nationalist gym, that was for male and female lifters. And so I thought that they were super progressive, but apparently not.
The Belgian people are actually the ones that said, hey, King Leopold, you got to quit doing this.
Oh, well, that was nice of them.
Yeah.
They
the
wrote a Post-it
actual
note?
his subjects were part of the movement that, well, think about it. Think about the way information traveled at that age. How was the average Belgian going to know where their king was getting his money from?
Well, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
It still is fun to blame Belgium.
Yeah. but actual
I mean, when does anybody ever get mad at Belgium? They deserve it.
they did sort of get squished flat as a result of World War One. So there is that.
Well, there is that.
Yes.
So
they've had
I picked somebody you passed over because apparently they're not evil enough. The East India Company. I thought they were evil enough because although they got their asses whipped by Zheng Yisao, they had 3 times as big a navy as the UK. How did a private company have 3 times as big a navy as the entire country of the UK? I don't know, but they did. They did, and they ran shit, and they were horrible. And they ran the entire slave trade in the 19th century. So again, I thought I had the worst, but no, you beat me out.
They didn't run the entire slave trade. There was also the Royal Company of England.
Oh, all right. So they didn't...
Like the King of England was directly involved in setting up a company to transporting of West Africans to the Caribbean and North America and South America. Yeah. But yes.
Well, I guess my whole thing's shot to hell then. We'll just go with the King of Belgium. He's a piece of shit. Goddamn Belgians. They didn't have a navy. No. They didn't have shit, but he's the worst.
Well, you're really funny saying, like, how did they have a navy 3 times the size of Britain? And normally the answer to that question is always it was capitalism all along. In this case, it was mercantilism. They hadn't gotten to capitalism yet. So in that case, it was mercantilism over...
So is mercantilism just like capitalism with slaves?
No, mercantilism is capitalism, but instead of doing like world trade... you decide that your pool is the only pool that you want money to come into. So like Britain was a thing and France was a thing and Spain was a thing and Germany was a thing. And each one of them, it's like, we'll be self-sufficient inside us. And so we'll keep all of our money in us. But occasionally we will sell stuff. We will be merchants to entities outside of us so we can send goods out, but we get cash in. But God forbid we ever let any cash out. And so the whole thing with the British East India Company not wanting China to take silver from them and China not wanting to give silver to England, like the whole thing, like we want to hold on to our money, that's mercantilism.
Ah. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. I'm aware that automata are basically the only way that the British were able to get silver out of the Chinese without like having to steal it. They creating like the earliest robots out of like a
you mean all like the wind up toys and everything. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. The Chinese were crazy for all the like
clockwork
automated
stuff, yeah.
like ducks that would sing songs and spit water out of their mouths and stuff like that. They were crazy for it. So that was a big way for the UK to get silver, but that is such a strange way to think about global economics.
Yeah, the hard currency world. Because we're like on this weird verge of like almost leaving hard currency behind.
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense to leave hard. Oh, and now, all right, so I understand it now. And so I can explain it to other people since I have it in my head. The reason why you wanted to keep gold and silver out of other people's hands is because if you are going to be in a war, they could use that money against you.
Right.
If you keep the money out of their hands, they can't.
Yes. In fact, a whole bunch of what was going on when the Spanish were importing all of that silver from South and Central America is silver was getting devalued and it was really screwing up the war economies in like the 16th and 17th century. Like part of like everybody was fighting everybody about everything all the time, but because they brought so much silver into Spain, like silver lost value.
The Mansa Musa effect.
Yes,
where he spread gold all over the world and it crushed the world's economies.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's another reason why specie currency is a terrible idea. People get so mad. Our money isn't worth anything. We need to go back to the gold standard. And it's like, read a book. Just read any book. Any book at all.
Or there's a bunch of Twilight Zones you can watch. Those, if a book is too much.
Yeah, if Glenn Beck would set you on fire for reading that book, maybe try Twilight Zone.
Oh my goodness. Well, let's see.
I think we did it.
I think that is enough of this movie for such a frustratingly terrible movie. We certainly spent a lot of time on it, but I think in the fun way.
Well, I blame me for spending a lot of time on it. I got so excited about creating the IRL League of Extraordinary Gentlepeople that I completely forgot how fucking bad that movie was. My goodness, that was... Whew.
So,
it was a thing.
Let's see. Well, after this, we'll have to come up with something that's actually fun instead of just, like, fun when you stop doing it. But, yeah, we have to come up with what's next. Yeah, we got a whole pile of stuff to get through here.
Yes, all right.
Oh, my goodness. All these things are going to be so much fun. All right. Well, that is enough of that. We'll see you next week, and we'll see what we bring you.
There we go. And yeah, and don't forget, Plague of Strength, at Plague of Strength on Instagram, and plagueofstrength.com, and The History of Food with Greta is amazing, and you need to listen to it.
Yeah, History of American Food. I'm not quite to the 19th century quite yet, but I'm wandering around in the beginnings of it, and yeah, you'll get to learn and hear about all sorts of interesting things.
All right. Well, that's it. Until next week, you guys have an awesome one.
Thanks. Bye. We're on Instagram at PCG Podcast, and you can always reach out to us by email at pcgpodcasters@gmail.com. And you can find more dope beats like this one from royalraven.com.